6:37 on Tuesday, January 14th, 2025. A new calendar year. I call this meeting of the Chelmsford Conservation Commission to order. My name is Carl Bischoff, and the chair of the Conservation Commission. We'll be following the published and posted agenda, and this meeting is both in person and now in Zoom, we think. In the case of the Zoom not working, though, we will continue the meeting in person only. This meeting is being broadcast and recorded by Chelmsford Telemedia and will be available on their website and on YouTube. We do have a quorum here. I'm glad to see everyone made it tonight on time, so that's a good sign of the new year. And we're going to start off our first item on the agenda is the Open Space and Rec Plan. We have a presentation from Megan Tenhoff from the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments, who has been leading our subcommittee, which is focused on developing this plan. This plan is every 7 years or so we have to do an update. So Megan, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. My name is Megan Tenhoff. I'll just do a quick overview of the agenda for this evening, introduce myself and NIMCOG, go over open space and recreation planning, sort of 101, have an overview of the planning process and timeline, summarize our outreach efforts and feedback, brief overview of our analysis and needs, dive into the review of goals and objectives, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. Next slide.
Could you just bring that mic just a little bit closer to you? Yeah. Thank you.
Again, NIMCOG, Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. We are a regional planning agency that supports the 9 communities in Greater Lowell. We offer technical assistance in everything from zoning bylaws, open space recreation planning, and economic development. Next slide. So the Open Space and Recreation Plan was developed and led by a committee of, I think there is 9, 2 staff, and 2 members of the Conservation Commission and Select Board. Next slide. So what is open space? Well, open space is conservation land, it's forests, it's recreation, it's agricultural. It can be corridor parks or amenities like small parks or pocket parks. It could even be like green buffers along roadways. And it's any open area owned by an agency or an organization dedicated to conservation. Plus, and it could be undeveloped land with a particular conservation or recreation interest. So that could be brownfields. And importantly, it's for passive and active use. So everything from bird watching to soccer playing. Next slide. So what is an open space and recreation plan, or OSRP? Well, it's a blueprint for enhancing and preserving your community's open spaces, parks, and recreational opportunities, and it serves as a guide to maintain and enjoy all the things that make Chelmsford special. Next slide. So why does it matter? Why do we want to do an open space and recreation plan? To maintain and enhance the benefits of open space that make up the character of Chelmsford, increase accessibility to our green space, protect our green infrastructure like trees and wetlands. There's economic and fiscal benefits to developing a plan, and certain grant programs require them, and they're community-driven for outdoor spaces and recreational activities for generations. Next slide. So, doesn't Chelmsford have an open space and recreation plan? Well, they're updated every 5 or 7 years. The last one was done in 2017, and so we are working to do a new open space and recreation plan, and Chelmsford has had an OSRP since the 1960s. Next slide. So what is an OSRP and how is it organized? Well, there's 9 sections. I'm not going to go into each one of what's in each one of the sections, but it's a summary, introduction, a community setting where we lay the groundwork, a history of the community, put population characteristics, census data, and then projected growth patterns. Section 4 has environmental and inventory analysis, so we look at the geography, soils, topography, landscape character, water resources. Next slide. And then section 5 is an inventory of lands of conservation interest. So it could be private parcels, public, nonprofit parcels. Section 6 is the community vision. So a description of the open space and recreation planning process. And then section 7 leads us into an analysis of needs, which is really a summary of resource protection needs and community needs. Then that moves into section 8, goals and objectives, and then 9, which is really the work, and that is the 5-year action plan. So next slide. So the planning process is community engagement, collecting and analyzing data. We defined goals, and then we formulated objectives with the action items, created a draft plan, reviewed it with the public at our public forum number 2. We reviewed it and worked with the Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee. And go ahead, next slide. And so in the planning process, we are right here, right at the final plan. See the end. Next slide. Okay, so community engagement was, of course, central to any open space recreation plan process. So we had monthly OSRPC meetings. We did community events, Market on the Common. We did a survey, public forums, this is number 3, semi-structured interviews and focus groups. And we believe that we reached about 1,000 people through our engagement efforts, and semi-structured interviews and focus groups are highlighted for a reason. They are for our enhanced environmental justice outreach. So if you could go to the next slide. This is a lot of text, sorry about that. But environmental justice outreach is really driven by the state that all Massachusetts residents experience equal protection and meaningful involvement with respect to development, implementation, enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies, and the equitable distribution of environmental benefits. So environmental justice has definitions, and there are 6 areas in Chelmsford that meet the Massachusetts environmental justice guidelines of minorities comprised, so number 4, minorities comprise 24%. That's okay. 25% or more of the population, and the median household income of the municipality of the neighborhood doesn't exceed 150% of the statewide median income. No, wait till the end. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so the environmental justice principles that were used to drive this plan were led with empathy, thinking about the cumulative impacts for the environment, both the benefits and the burdens. And the outreach was really to support the cultivation and strengthen new relationships with EJ communities and including them in the process. Designed with the EJ communities. And so I wanted to make sure I read this, what meaningful involvement is defined by the state, and that is the meaningful involvement of all people with respect to the development, implementation, enforcement of environmental laws and regulations policies, including climate change policies, and the equitable distribution of energy and environmental benefits and burdens. Next slide. So, our enhanced environmental justice outreach included focus groups, semi-structured interviews, and our survey. Our surveys flyers were posted at over 140 locations throughout Chelmsford, and 94 of them were in environmental justice neighborhoods. So what we heard in particular from our environmental justice outreach is this need for more signage and knowing where open spaces and parks are. Flexible open space. So some place where somebody could go watch a movie, like have outdoor movie night, or they could play cricket. We also heard that people wanted opportunities to learn about the ecology and potential restoration. Fun, youth-centric programming. People were wanting things like amenities such as benches, restrooms, shades, or picnic tables to enhance their experience outside. Heat relief. So shade or places to go and cool off in the water when it's hot. A recreation department, community food security, both in the preservation of agricultural land, pea patches, and food security. And then accessibility really was quite a thread throughout all of our engagement, both in the ability for people to physically access the space once they get there, but also the transportation to actually get to a place to recreate. Next slide. So our survey, we had 411 survey responses, and the main thing that people really wanted to see was increased accessibility within recreation and open spaces. So accessible trails, better communication about how to use spaces, and recreation opportunities. Next slide. So now what? So we did our outreach data, and then we looked at existing plans, both with the town of Chelmsford and state plans. And then we took our community and environmental data, and then we put it into what we call an analysis of needs. Next slide. So the resource protection needs for the town of Chelmsford included flood mitigation and stormwater management, water resources, wildlife habitat and biodiversity, climate resilient infrastructure, and public education on resource protection. Next slide. The community needs were recreation opportunities, connectivity and access, equity and inclusion, climate adapted amenities, agricultural lands, and youth and senior engagement. Next slide. So we did all that work, and then together with the committee, we came up with our statement of purpose, and I'll read that. Chelmsford strives to create a future that prioritizes sustainable land use, equitable recreational access, and resilience to climate change. By expanding and protecting open spaces, the town aims to foster accessibility, enhance quality of life, and build a community that thrives for generations to come. So we took our analysis of needs, our statement of purpose, looked at what the gaps are, and developed objectives and actions to identify a roadmap to achieve our goals, which were then reviewed by the Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee and the town. Next slide. So, the exciting part, what are our goals and objectives? Next slide. We have 5 overarching goals with several objectives under each one. I'm going to just read, let's see, where am I? I'll read just the goal and then some of the key objectives, and we can dive into some of the action items a little bit later because it is quite long if we go through the whole thing. So, goal number 1 is to increase community engagement with open spaces. So what do we mean by that? It's enhanced communication about the town's resources and activities, increasing signage, expanding public education programs on environmental, historical, and recreation topics, improve access to information, engage youth, and strengthen partnerships through nonprofit organizations. Next slide. Goal number 2, enhance accessibility and promote equity in open spaces. Our objectives are to expand accessible trails and safety features, improve physical access through sidewalks and trail connections, and focus investments in underserved neighborhoods. Next slide. Goal number 3, improved climate resilience through strategic land use. Our 5 objectives are prioritize land conservation in climate vulnerable areas, protect drinking water quality, adapt open spaces for climate change, identify opportunities for local food production, and increase public awareness of open space benefits. Next slide. Goal number 4, maintain, upgrade, and steward community spaces for high quality conservation, recreation, ecological, and agricultural uses. Our 4 objectives are develop a comprehensive land management and maintenance plans, explore opportunities to upgrade facilities for improved safety and comfort for active and passive recreation, foster community stewardship, and identify farmlands of local importance and protect them to limit losses. And goal number 5, next slide, is to expand recreational opportunities and facilities. So our 4 objectives are: investigate the development of flexible, multi-use open spaces to serve a broad range of community recreational needs. Explore the costs and potential for development of new playgrounds, amenities, and recreational facilities that meet the needs of the community and neighborhoods. Explore potential amenities that meet the needs of the community. Provide additional recreational programming to serve residents of all ages within the community. Next slide. So it's not meant to be able to be seen there, but what I've provided to you is the 5-year action plan. And this really is the working document. It's iterative to guide the implementation of this open space and recreation plan. And one of the key components of this work is the development of an open space and recreation plan implementation committee. And you'll notice when you review them that a lot of the actions sort of interact with each other, and that was done on purpose. And you'll, like looking in the document, you can see how they interact together. And that's to build capacity and think about how can one project or program support another. Okay, so it outlines the actions that we need to achieve our objectives. It's a 5-year timeline. We have a prioritization of ongoing, short-term, medium, and long-term, and then a list of potential funding sources and who is the responsible parties to do this work. Next slide. Okay, so questions?
So, thank you, Megan. This was, having participated on this, this was a very interesting process, and the team did a fantastic job. I also want to thank NEMCOG, Megan and Mike. Michael's not here, but you guys did a fantastic job supporting us. But I would like to open up to the commission if you have questions on this. Megan did say we need to set up an implementation committee, so that's on us to get that organized and make that happen. And anybody watching and listening that's interested, please connect with David. We can start the process to get that started. But questions from the commission?
Just
Peter, yeah.
if I can make just a comment, I'd like to echo what Carl said. Great job, Megan and your whole team. Thank you. I've gotten a few questions from the public, and to address some of those, I just want to say that there are a lot of questions and issues surrounding open space that different members of the public may have, and this plan is not designed to answer all those little questions. It's a broad umbrella following state guidance. And as Megan mentioned, it's important to have, partly to get our community a chance to provide input, which you did great, and partly because you need it to guide our actions, and thirdly, you need it to apply for certain grants. But as Carl mentioned, there's a lot more to do and a lot more details related to open space that will fall into the implementation committee, not necessarily this plan.
Yep, this is our responsibility in conservation. We own, it's since the beginning of the Conservation Commission Act in 1960 or 59, it says create an open space and rec plan. When we, as Megan said, we've been doing it. I counted them up. It sounds like we've done almost on track to the 7-year cycle. So that's pretty good for
Great.
being around that long. Chris?
Yeah, just my comment, good presentation, Megan. I guess my comment is one of the things that you touched on really was, we've got what I would describe kind of hidden gems throughout the town. I mean, some great reservations, some great resource areas for recreation, but a lot of times it's difficult for people, many even that have lived here for many, many years to find those and to be able to take advantage of those great resources. So I guess, do we have any short-term plans at this point to quickly try to get some signs out there, better signs that we can and communicate where everything is? Because I think that'd be a really good thing to strike at first.
I mean, that's kind of on us.
Well, that is Objective 1.1, Action 1 is to enhance signage. And there's some suggested locations to do that first and then some secondary ones. But yes, that's definitely something that we heard many times, both in the survey and in our other outreaches. People not even really knowing what's down the street.
If I could add, is Megan's group, NIMCOG, does other projects for the town, and it's kind of like a consulting firm. So I think you're kind of done with this project. I know you remain interested, but your scope of work is kind of over, but now it comes to us.
Well, it has to be submitted to the state
Well,
for their
yeah,
approval.
yeah, thank you. But we certainly could engage some outside help if we had a bunch of things we wanted assistance with, not putting up signs, but some of the broader goals. But that's on us, as Carl said.
Okay. Megan, thanks. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Any quick questions from the audience? This isn't really a public forum. Well, it is, I guess, but you had the Q&A session last week, so don't see anybody moving, so.
Okay, and then just one last slide, quickly, David. So what's coming up next? Public comment was actually due January 13th. The next, we're on a presentation roadshow. The next one will be at the planning board, followed by the select board, and then we will submit it to the Department of Conservation Services for approval. And please reach out to David to stay involved and join the implementation committee.
Thank you. Right on
Thank
time.
you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Again, I want to say the plan in 2017 was an excellent plan, but didn't quite get over the goal line for a number of reasons. And I can say for sure that NEMCOG helped us get us, we're not there yet, but we will get over the goal line. And it's totally due to the help from NEMCOG. So thank you very much. So that we can have a official accepted plan by the state.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Megan.
Okay, we will continue with our regularly scheduled programming. So I would like to just make a quick statement. The Conservation Commission is chartered to protect our natural resources, most specifically the wetlands, and to manage land held in conservation. The commission is made up of 7 volunteer citizens of Chelmsford. I've decided I like to repeat that every, like twice a year, brand new year and maybe a new fiscal year in July, something like that. But just kind of a reminder of why we're here. So are there any citizens here that have concerns that are not on our agenda that would like to speak up on something that they'd like to bring to our attention? David, I assume we got our Zoom up and running. It
Yes.
looks like it is, so
Yes.
nobody there, nobody in the room. I'm glad to see, hello Vivian, glad to
Hi.
see you. Nice.
How are you?
Good. All right, next thing on our list, we have a report on the findings pursuant to to the execution of December 12, 24 administrative search warrant at 5961 Carlisle Street. I am going to set this up with some commentary to just kind of get us background on this. Hopefully I can just hit the salient points, but it will take a minute here because this is involved. So in 2023, Mr. and Mrs. O'Donnell from 63 Carlisle Street expressed concern to the conservation agent, David Kuntz, about erosion of a slope adjacent to their driveway due to, they said, to their neighbor, Mr. Harvey, at 5961 Carlisle Street, clearing vegetation and trees in a nearby wetlands. We heard a complaint from them just a year ago on January 23rd at a meeting here. After that discussion, we concluded that we needed clarification if it indeed was a wetland. It does not show as wetlands on the GIS map. Our question was whether or not we had any jurisdiction here. David was asked to go on site and determine if we might have jurisdiction, and we agreed that town council could be asked to clarify who has the burden to determine what is jurisdictional, and it needs to be determined whether the erosion is impacting the wetlands. At our April 9th meeting last year, we had a follow-on discussion on this topic with, at that time, our town council at that point in time. After discussion with town council and David in that meeting, and based on the advice of town council, we voted as a commission to request town council to contact the property owner's attorney for permission to go onto the property to determine whether there is a wetland. And we said if permission was refused, that town council could then pursue filing for an administrative search warrant. That did not happen prior to July 1st, which is when town council in Chelmsford changed from the former firm to KP Law on July 1st. So over the summer, David began working with the new town council on this topic, and we had a executive session here in November with the attorney from KP Law, and his summary of the situation at that time was that 2 letters were sent to Mr. Harvey. They were emailed to his attorney. He had left multiple voice messages and no response from Mr. Harvey nor his attorney. And our town council suggested that the commission may be at the point where an administrative search warrant is required to determine if there is indeed a resource area on that parcel and if there was a violation to the bylaws. If the visit revealed that there was a violation, town council said that we could then issue an enforcement order if we chose to. The commission at that meeting voted unanimously to authorize our agent and town council to file for an administrative search warrant at 5961 Carlisle Street on December 9th. That was granted by the court. On December 12th, it was executed by David, our agent, and 3 experts from LEC, who we will hear from momentarily, and at the site. The intent of the consultant investigation was to determine if there was indeed a wetland present at 5961 Carlisle Street, and if so, is this wetland jurisdictional under the Wetland Protection Act or the Chelmsford Wetlands Bylaw? And is there evidence of any significant recent disturbance within this wetland, and is that likely to have caused any erosion? Meanwhile, comparison of Google Earth images of this property between October 2021 and May of 2023 do indeed, if you look at Google Earth, they do show significant tree canopy removed just west of the upper portion of the driveway to 63 Carlisle Street. This work, according to what we have heard from the neighbors, is this work was done in the February 2023 timeframe. We have now received the report as requested from LEC, and we are now ready for them to describe their findings, and I believe they're on the Zoom call. David, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I thought that summarized it very well, Carl. So I'll just add so that the search warrant was executed on December 12th. I don't know whether you mentioned that
Yep.
or not. So yes, Tom Paragallo, Richard Kirby, and Nicole Ferreira from LEC are here on Zoom. I guess, Tom, do you want to start by summarizing your findings?
You're muted, Tom.
Yes, thank you. Just as you noted in your summary a few minutes ago, now I got 2 pictures. Oh well. Our objective was to go in and determine if in fact there was a wetland there, because that had not yet been determined definitively. It was done remotely, and apparently there were some applications or some other issues that depended on knowing if there was a wetland there, where that boundary was. And so that was one of our tasks. And then secondly, to determine what kind of wetland it was. And then that would determine under what jurisdiction it would be held if there was a wetland. We also examined the area within what we thought to be a wetland to see if there was any disturbance. And those were our primary objectives. A lot of it was soil-based for a number of reasons. The The time of the year, kind of limits the degree to which we can describe vegetation, although Rich can maybe talk a little bit about that. We did describe the vegetation within the wetland and also adjacent uplands. And then we also described the soil at random locations. And all of this then was GPSed in a very general sense, so that there would be some sort of graphic of what we did, so you could follow it in your discussions and meetings. I would add that we were working under the search warrant, and it was our opinion, and also the opinion of the town's attorney, that we would not be able to, or the search warrant did not allow us to specifically hang wetland boundary flags and then survey locate those flags. That was beyond what was described as observations. So our map is not an exact delineation, or should not be construed as being an official wetland delineation, but in an approximate boundary of what we found out there. And after we did our data analysis, the three of us walked around the boundary and basically picked points that we thought the wetland would probably follow. So I just want to put that caveat out there. Our work was limited by the search warrant and also the amount of time we were able to have on the site. In addition, we did review quite a number of aerial photographs from Google Earth, as you mentioned, and also historic aerials. And then later on, David sent us some photographs that were taken at the site by one of the neighbors, I believe. And so we also gave some consideration to that. But our focus was not specifically on tree removal per se, although we did identify one or two areas that appeared the trees were removed. But in both of those areas, it was our opinion that those trees were removed in upland areas, not in the resource area. And so what we identified there was a wet meadow, freshwater wetland, isolated, and that is there's no water body with which it's connected. And as a result, it's not under the jurisdiction of the Wetlands Protection Act, but would be under the jurisdiction of your bylaws and regulations. I think that covers most of it. Maybe Rich and Nicole would want to add something.
Good evening, Rich Kirby from LEC. I would just add that, as part of our wetland evaluation, we also identified the plants that comprise the dominant plant communities within the wetland and within the adjacent upland. And, we provided a list of those plants that we observed. Obviously, within the wetland area, we observed, greater than 50% wetland plants, mostly herbaceous type plants with scattered patches and individuals of shrubs and saplings. And then, of course, within the adjacent upland, we were on a slope and observed predominantly upland plants. So that was really just how we evaluated the plant community composition there to determine the wetland boundary as it related to the vegetation. And then, of course, we married that with the soils investigation that Tom did to come up with our estimated wetland boundary.
Okay. Is Nicole there? Is she going to add anything or not?
Hi, Nicole Farrar from LEC. Don't really have much to add other than we used the GPS to GPS the boundary, but it was an estimated boundary.
Okay. Thank you. So, thank you very much. I have questions, but I want to see if the rest of the commission has questions, or David, if you want to add anything right now.
Sure. So it's not shown on any of these photographs, but I think it was maybe 2 or 3 months ago. I can go back and get the exact date that an existing driveway up in this location was paved and I think did extend a little closer. I think it's in the buffer zone to begin with, and did extend a little bit closer to the wetlands. I think one of the issues conceivably could be issuing the commission taking enforcement action because that work was in the buffer zone without getting approval. However, I don't recommend that. The way that I typically handle paving of existing driveways when someone contacts me is that I'll take a look at it, and what I say more often than not is that a crushed stone filled trench or strip needs to go around the driveway on the wetland side in order to accept runoff. Had the property owner contacted me, in this case, that's what I would have told him to do. Of course, he didn't contact me, so didn't have the opportunity to tell him to do that. But the reason I'm not recommending an enforcement order is because in this particular case, the LEC's findings indicate that, at least so far, at least since the time when the driveway was paved, that there's really been no impact to the wetlands from the driveway. So I think it's something that should be, an eye should be kept on it moving forward. But right now, I don't think it would be productive to issue an enforcement order for that.
So the other question I had real quick was the evidence of erosion or this disruption. Is there any evidence that this could have caused erosion? I don't know if that was stated earlier by Tom, because that was the original concern of the neighbor, was erosion to their driveway.
And trees.
Yeah, so the disruption of the trees, did that cause the evidence of any erosion?
Would you like me to give an opinion on that?
Yes.
We looked for evidence of erosion, or more probably that, and also sedimentation, which the two go together. And one of the things that we examined was the soil profile. And typically, if something has received sediment from the slope above, it would be pretty apparent in the profile, and it would be obvious with an abrupt boundary and different material on the top than the original surface, for instance. And right below the driveway, in probably the most critical point, David was there to sort of guide a little bit, because I wasn't really sure where exactly this point of interest was. So we looked there, and we looked at other places as well, and did not see any evidence of sedimentation within this wetland area. The side slopes had been disturbed, but all the disturbance we saw was in the buffer zone. And we looked at potential sedimentation right at the edge of the driveway, and there were some fragments of crushed stone, and I don't know what people are familiar with, but what I would call a graded base material that had sloughed over the edge. But as far as we had observed, saw none of that within the resource area. And as far as any tree removal, again, we didn't address that directly. We could go back and look at that more carefully, which I would want to, take a look at more specifically at the trees. But we did look at a whole series of photographs. And as I mentioned, the trees that we noticed missing were in the upland and didn't really relate to what we thought was our scope. So, of course, anytime you remove vegetation on an upland slope, there's the potential for wetland impact from erosion and sedimentation, but we did not observe that in the time we were there or where we examined.
Okay. All right, thanks. Peter, do you want to start? Do you have any questions?
Yeah, just quickly, the jurisdictional wetland, the wetland that's jurisdictional under our bylaw, which is basically this house's backyard, presumably has been there for a long time, and I think this house has been there for a long time, right?
I think so. I think
Very
it's an old
much a
farmhouse.
pre-existing condition, correct? That's not a new house, it's been there a while. So I just want to clarify that. My second question is, the trees that we think were removed, I realize maybe you guys didn't look that closely at the trees. But the trees that you did mention, that you kind of looked at, you said they were in the upland area, but David, maybe you can help me. You're sitting next to me, staring at this map. The trees that were removed, they were outside the wetland, I got that. Were they within the 25-foot buffer? It looks like they probably were in the 50-foot buffer, like exactly how close to the wetland, or not exactly, roughly, how close were those trees? And is it sort of under our bylaws, don't disturb 25 feet from the wetland?
I know you want to start, Tom, answering that question.
Yeah, well, as I said, our measurements should not be considered exact or even something that you'd want to take anything more than a rough measurement from. Let me just pull up the map and take a look. You have the map in front of you, and I think Nicole put on the 20 and 50-foot buffer zone based on our approximate wetland boundary. So one of the trees that we noticed was definitely removed was up near where this pavement was placed. There was a large deciduous tree there that had been removed. And another one, I believe this map is oriented north-south. Let's see. To the south of the wetland area, probably somewhere roughly within, I would say, again, I'm just estimating here, probably somewhere between 25 and 50 feet from the wetland boundary near that orange dot where the lettering says S4, which is actually our soil sample site. But from that vicinity, there was another tree that looked like it had been removed there in the upland.
Okay, and again,
That we could define was certainly removed. This is the other thing with photo interpretation. We went through several different flights, several times of the year. And I think what's been in that wetland area for a long, long time is sort of a shrub community, shrub herbaceous community. Very few trees, if any, and the buffer zone had a few trees, but also very shrubby vegetation. And so when you look at leaf-on photography, it looks like everything's covered with a forest. But then when you look at leaf-off photography at different time of the year, in the same year, you can see that the area did not have a lot of standing trees. Even back, well, probably the best resolution in Google was a photo taken in April 2018, which looks very much like the picture that's up now before you. And with the exception of the couple of trees that I mentioned. And the tone on there, while it may imply, a bare ground surface, I think if you follow that to the next photograph in the next season, you see that it's actually heavily covered with vegetation with some shrub growth. So, interpreting these things is just that, it's an interpretation.
Okay, so that wetland area that you identified is presently covered with a mix of shrubs and other vegetation, but not trees. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we didn't
Okay.
see any trees like anything over 5 inches in diameter in there. There was one close to the boundary, but it was shrubs and herbaceous vegetation, as Rich mentioned.
Okay, and my last question, that particular area that is identified as a jurisdictional wetland does not appear to have been altered significantly in recent times? Can we tell that?
Well, I would say, yeah. I mean, there was one area of clearly where the buffer zone was altered, but not the wetland, except for the fact that in one of the pictures, as I mentioned, it looks like a ditch had been dug near the driveway near S2. Actually, S2 is right in that ditch. But the soil profile did not demonstrate any deposition. That's not to say that material might not have been taken out, because there was standing water very distinctly in that area. And that's only from evidence from the photographs that were handed to us by David later that we saw.
Okay, thank you.
So if I could just add to that. So I'm just looking at the at LEC's report. So it's saying LEC also reviewed aerial photography from Google Earth dated 2017, 2018, 2019, 2021, 2023, and 2023. So I guess maybe a couple of
That should be
different.
2024, sorry.
2024. And historic aerials dated 1963, 1971, 1995, 2001, 2005, and 2008. So is it, Tom, is it fair to say that if you had noticed any tree clearing to speak of with reviewing all of those aerials, all of those dates, that you would have noticed that?
Well, obviously, from 1963 to the present, there's been all kinds of changes. And as I said in the report, we're trying to get a track on, what land use changes were occurring in that area. And I don't think it's any surprise that all of this area was in agricultural use at one point. So you have that era of disturbance where you have, perhaps pasturing, increases in organic matter, so the surface builds up, perhaps tree removal, perhaps other things, drainage, and all that sort of thing. And then it's probably fairly stable from the 1970s onward. But in the last few years, we focused on the last few years because that's where it was alleged there was disturbance. We didn't see anything remarkable or significant from, number one, its past history, or even currently. If I did view the photographs that were sent by a report late this afternoon, from, I don't have it in front of me, but from the attorney's office of the abutter.
MTC, yeah.
Yeah, and there was one photograph in there where it appears there's no vegetation on the surface. And, that's interesting. It'd be nice to examine that further and then maybe go back and review. But I think when we were there, we saw no evidence of tree removal. There were no stumps. Typically when somebody removes trees from a well, and it's even a year later, it's generally fairly obvious. But with stumps or very disturbed ground where stumps were pulled, debris from the trees, and vegetation doesn't recover as quickly as it appears to be growing in there fairly well, especially the shrubs are fairly well developed. It's not like just a year's growth or something like that. So that's what we observed. And it's consistent with the area photography, at least down in the wetland area, that's always been sort of a shrubby, herbaceous combination, most of its history.
Okay, Peter, thanks. Chris, anything?
No questions.
Mark?
I'm not seeing enough yet. Okay, I'll leave it at that right now.
Okay. Yeah, keep in mind, this is not a hearing. This is not a regulatory hearing. It is a complaint brought to us. But, yeah.
No questions.
John?
No questions.
All right. Okay. So, David, do you have a recommendation at the moment?
Well, I know it is not, strictly speaking, hearing. On the other hand, it's probably in the commission's best interest to, obtain any and all information, regardless for the source. I don't know whether the owners and or the abutters and or their attorney who are here tonight, whether they want to say anything, and whether, Mr. Chairman, you would allow them to
Yeah,
say
I would
anything.
allow, yeah, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Kuntz and Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Do you all have hard copies of the letter that was shown a moment ago on the screen that I submitted late today? I have copies if you don't have physical copies.
No, they don't.
Okay, I've got copies here. It may just be helpful to have some of these plans in front of you as I talk through them, so I have 7 copies.
Thank you.
I have it right here. Sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I'll just begin. For the record, my name is Adam Costa. Was before you maybe 6 or 7 months ago, as your chronology had indicated a bit earlier, representing the O'Donnells who are here with me tonight as well, Sean and Francesca. So appreciate you hearing from us this evening. And I apologize for the lateness of my submittal. I only received the correspondence late in the day yesterday, and so we had to digest it relatively quickly, but I wanted to put a comprehensive response together as best I could. I appreciate the work that LEC has done, and I appreciate some of the additional explanation that we got tonight, which I, of course, didn't have in crafting my letter. I think the greatest frustration I had in reviewing LEC's report, it confirmed much of what we knew to be true. You know, we appreciate that a consultant that's engaged as a third-party expert late in the process, 1.5 to 2 years after alleged alteration of earth has occurred, doesn't have the benefit of what my client saw with their own two eyes, and is simply trying to piece things together on the site based upon what they can see and do research through things like aerial imagery. So we recognize that, we appreciate that. Having said that, my clients reported to me what they witnessed, again, with their own 2 eyes back in February of 2023. And they witnessed significant clearing of Mr. Harvey's, I'll call it his backyard. It's really sort of his back and his side yard, immediately adjacent to their property boundary. What we know is minimally, there were 29 trees removed just on our property, just on the O'Donnell's own property by Mr. Harvey, who trespassed over the boundary line. So 29 trees just on our property. We don't have a count of how many trees were removed on Mr. Harvey's property. Now, I'm not suggesting all of these trees were 18, 24-inch diameter trees. I also know enough about wetlands. I'm not a wetlands specialist or scientist, but I know enough to know that you typically don't necessarily get 18-inch, 24-inch diameter trees growing in the center of a wetland. But I've highlighted a couple of things here, and I want to kind of start, I guess, in reverse order of the way that I presented it in my letter, because I've heard LEC reference on a few occasions, the different consultants who have spoken, the quote-unquote wetland, that they didn't observe any trees necessarily or stumps located within the wetland, that they couldn't confirm necessarily that there had been alteration of the wetland, although I did hear the consultant say there was one area where the buffer zone was clearly altered, but not the wetland itself. And I think it's important to recognize we're talking about a jurisdictional wetland that is jurisdictional under your bylaw and your wetlands regulations. That's distinct, and I know that you know this, that's distinct from a Wetlands Protection Act wetland resource area. Your bylaw and your accompanying regulations are more protective than the state act. Not every community has that. I represent a number of communities that have local bylaws and regulations that simply mirror the act and provide some additional processes and procedures, but they don't provide substantive standards. They don't increase the protection of wetland resource areas. You do, and in fact, you do this a couple of ways, and I've highlighted it on page 2 of my letter. You actually define as within, as constituting a quote-unquote resource area, not just the wetland itself, in this case a freshwater wetland, but the buffer zone. So you qualify the buffer zone as a resource area. Now, the state act doesn't do that. The state act creates a buffer zone, a jurisdictional buffer of 100 feet from the boundaries of a wetland resource area, but it doesn't qualify the buffer itself as the resource area. Your bylaw and your accompanying regulations do that. So when we talk about alteration and we distinguish between, well, yes, again, to quote LEC, there was one area where the buffer zone was clearly altered. I wrote this in my notes as I was hearing it, but not the wetland. It doesn't really matter from the commission's perspective. If the alteration was done anywhere within the buffer zone, that buffer zone is the resource area and requires enforcement. Your regulations actually go one step further. Your regulations say within a buffer zone, all activities that involve removal of vegetation are presumed to impermissibly alter the adjacent resource areas, and actually put the burden on the party that is defending the work that was done to rebut that presumption, which of course I don't know if anybody's here on behalf of the property owner. I don't think so. And they haven't appeared at prior meetings, so they haven't rebut that presumption. So what my clients witnessed back in February of 2023 was wholesale clearing of the back and side yard of Mr. Harvey's property. When you look at the exhibits, and a couple of them have been shown on the screen already, and I appreciate that I walked through Google Earth as well. You can't see much in the aerial photography from back in '85 and the early '90s because the resolution's so poor back then. But I agree that as you get into the 2010s and into the early 2020s, there is a distinct difference seasonally based upon what you see in April, what you see in August, what you see in December. Having said that, if you turn to Exhibit 3, and I've got the exhibits each marked at the top with a number. Exhibit 3, which is the photograph that is currently shown on the screen, this is the aerial photograph, and it's hard to read, but if you look at the top left corner of the photograph, it actually has a date here. There's a bar you drag to show the history of the aerial photography, and the date here is 10/2021. So this is October of 2021, and you can see, and granted, it's October, so it's the fall, it's not July, but still you've got a fairly significant canopy here of trees. But you can see that the canopy was significant enough to completely cover that property. You can barely see the south west corner of the house because there's such a significant canopy running right up to the Arborvitae road that's on my client's property that separates these two properties. When you flip the page to Exhibit 4, this is just sort of rotated 180 degrees. Now you're viewing it as if you're standing above Carlisle Street. So you can see the 61 or the 59 to 61 Carlisle Street property is now in the foreground. My client's property is at the rear with the solar panels. So when you look again at the subject property, you can see how dense that vegetation is. Whether it's shrubbery, whether it's trees, whether it's a combination of the two, it's fairly dense enough to form almost a complete canopy covering that property. When you then shift to the next series of exhibits, 5, 6, 7, 8, these are all dated May of 2023. So this is approximately 3 months, 2.5 months after the clear cutting of the property occurred. And you can see Exhibit 5 is the same as that first exhibit I showed, same vantage point with my client's property at the bottom of the page. You can see that there's some green on Mr. Harvey's property, but it's a little bit of scrub. There's not much there. There was obviously some significant clearing of that property. Exhibit 6 is the same as the second exhibit I showed you of present day or earlier, but this is the present day version. This is rotated 180 degrees as if you're standing or hovering above Carlisle Street. Again, you can see not much left on that property, so much so you can actually see the rear boundary of the property is clearly delineated by where the forest starts again. There's a line there where you can see the delineation. And then again, if you turn to Exhibit 7 and 8, this is something that Google Earth lets you do. It's as if you're almost hovering down in a drone a little bit closer, so it's sort of a 3D pictometry. I mean, there's not much left there. It looks like there's one tree between Mr. Harvey's property and the Arborvitae road that separates the Harvey property from the O'Donnell property. That one tree is sort of standing here. It's a little awkward looking because of the technology. And then again, Exhibit 8 is viewing it from the other angle, looking at the back of the 59 to 61 Carlisle Street property, and you can again see there's not much there. So there was clearly alteration of a wetland here. How extreme that alteration was, we don't know. But it appears that the wetland was altered. We have additional photographs. I didn't want to overwhelm the commission. We have dozens and dozens of photographs, not aerial, but ground photographs from the time frame February, March, April of 2023, showing work as it was being done out there, showing the land as it looked immediately after the clearing occurred. And again, this is a combination of work that was done straight through the wetlands. We have photos of individuals standing in the wetlands with nets, and we have a photograph of a bulldozer being driven down and into and through and across the wetlands. So there was wetland alteration done, and even if there wasn't, even your consultant has acknowledged that there was certainly alteration of the resource area because the buffer zone qualifies as a resource area. So, we would hope that the commission would take enforcement. The last thing I want to say, and this goes to the issue of the driveway that Mr. Kuhn spoke to, I guess to the left of the Harvey house. So if you look on your screen there, right about where the cursor is right there. So I think the representation was made that this was a prior driveway that had been paved. And we dispute that the driveway to the Harvey residence, you can see it, is on the opposite side of the residence. That's always where the driveway to the Harvey residence has been. There was an area that over the course of time turned from what was sort of grass, sort of dirt, to something that was more like gravel, and then suddenly the gravel was cleared and graded, and then the cleared and graded gravel became paved. So it happened over a period of time. But I dispute the idea that this is some driveway that's existed for 30 years and all they did is simply go out there and pave it. I agree that I've dealt with conservation commissions and communities representing applicants. I've worked with Concoms and communities I represent. It's not unusual to talk to the agent, and the agent talks about some erosion control to ensure that there's no damage to the wetland resource areas, and then you can complete your paving of the driveway. This is something different, which is the cause for our second complaint to the commission. So again, that's a lot, and I know it's a lot to digest in terms of just receiving the letter now, but we certainly appreciate the efforts that the commission has taken to follow through with this. I know if you've reviewed some of my emails to Mr. Kuntz, I've expressed a bit of frustration over the past year and a half. That's not really been directed necessarily at him or at you. It's just frustration with the process. We did start this a year and a half ago. You had a transition of council in the midst of it, so we're just anxious to see some resolution to this because we believe, and I'd be interested, I heard LEC comment on no damage occurring to the driveway on my client's property, but then LEC said something to the effect of they acknowledged that the side slopes had been disturbed. So again, our concern is, and it goes back to what we initially said when we came before the commission, okay, maybe if you look at the driveway now, it has not been compromised. But the consequence of all that's been done and the compromising of the side slopes to the driveway over time, our fear is going to have an effect on the stability of the driveway and the condition of the driveway, and that's through no fault of our own. That's the consequence of these activities that occurred without permission from the commission.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is any of that you mentioned inside a buffer zone or a recharge area on the edge of the driveway?
Any of what?
The
The driveway that Mr. Harvey installed?
potential, yeah,
Yes.
potential of damage.
So the driveway that was paved, that had not been paved previously, that many years ago hadn't been a driveway at all, is not within the wetland itself. We're not alleging that it is. The wetland doesn't extend that far. Even our own plans that were prepared for my clients and their property when they had their in-law apartment approved, even those plans don't show the wetland extending all the way out to the front of Mr. Harvey's property. But it is within the buffer. I mean, the buffer zone is so expansive here. If you include the full 100-foot buffer, it covers most of Mr. Harvey's property. It's 2/3 of his house is within the buffer.
Right.
Yeah, it looks like the driveway is just outside of the 50-foot buffer, and as you mentioned, within the 100.
Okay.
That sounds right.
I mean, just from the drawing.
Yeah, no. So we got, let's call it last-minute information here. We're still digesting the report. I'm really glad we get the paper copies. Thank you very much for giving us the paper copies. This is, again, I'm going to reiterate, this is not a hearing, this is a complaint, but I'm going to recommend that we, if it was a hearing, that we continue it, that we don't make any decisions at the moment. I think we all need to review the documentation and kind of get our heads around what's going on. Does that, I'm seeing nodding.
Yeah.
I don't think we have to vote on something that's not a.
Can I ask a question while we have? So what I recall from the previous hearings, discussions tonight and in the past, was a concern about driveway erosion of your client. And what I heard tonight was there's a concern the driveway might erode, which kind of makes sense if you remove the vegetation. I might be wrong, but I thought in the past a statement was made that the driveway is eroding presently, and I think the LEC report, if I got this straight, said that there is currently no evidence
Correct.
of erosion.
Correct.
Therefore, your client's concern appears to be, the future, which is fair. I get it. Do I have that right?
I think that's right. We had stated, if I remember, it's been a few months, and I've had a few hearings since then, but if I remember correctly from what I said when I was before you in April maybe of last year, or maybe it was later than that, in the summer, was that we had, and we have some photographs of this, we had belief that there were portions of, toward the front of our property where we enter in off of Carlisle Street, areas where the driveway was showing some potential of eroding. Now, look to us like it was. I'm not an expert. My clients are not experts. Whether LEC saw that same area and said, no, that's not erosion at all, or LEC didn't go in that particular area, that wouldn't be on Mr. Harvey's property. It would have been on my client's property. So we did believe that there were some areas that were presently eroding and that the situation was only going to get worse.
Yeah, fair enough.
But it's also important to remember that the erosion would have to be impacting the wetlands. And there was no evidence of that. I mean, I was right there, Mr. Paragallo, took soil samples at the toe of the slope right below the alleged erosion. I mean, there was absolutely no indication of any kind of material from that side slope being in the wetlands. I mean, you have to remember, a driveway is not a protected interest under the wetland regulations.
Right, and then just quickly, did I see photographs of a utility trench built along your client's driveway, or have I mixed up? David,
No, that's correct. That's
Yeah,
correct.
I'm kind of curious how that affects our discussion. We don't have to talk about it right now, but I wanted to at least put it on the table.
Well, maybe I can let Attorney Costa give some background on that.
Sure. So there was an issue. There's, as I'm sure you've all gathered through the conversations we've had over the past year and a half, there's much more to this story than simply some wetlands interests. I mentioned before 29 trees removed on my client's property. There have been exchanges of threats of litigation between the parties, the O'Donnells and Mr. Harvey. Mr. Harvey raised about 2 years ago, when my client was before the planning board. Was it planning board for your zoning board of appeals for the what you can now do as of right, an accessory apartment. Mr. Harvey appeared at those hearings and expressed concern that the gas line and the water line providing service to my client's property was on the Harvey property. Now, of course, my clients didn't install that gas line. They bought the house after it had been constructed. But they did some investigation, and they confirmed, in fact, that was the case. So National Grid and their contractor contacted the town and coordinated removing a portion, not the entirety, but a portion of the lines that were crossing over onto the Harvey property to move them onto the O'Donnell property. So that occurred within the past.
Last November was the water line. Was the gas line. Last December was the water.
Yeah, so November, December last year.
2024?
No, 2023.
23. A year ago.
Oh, yeah, it's 25 now, correct. A year ago, that's correct.
And even though at that time we didn't know for sure it was a wetland, I did review both the state and bylaw regulations with regard to installation of utilities, and it was my determination that was an exempt activity. It did not require a filing with the Conservation Commission, and I informed Mr. Harvey as well of my opinion.
And at that time, we didn't have an indication it was a wetland.
Well, we had the Goddard delineation, but that's all.
Okay, sorry,
So
you're right.
we
Okay.
didn't know for sure. But, that's why, but I wanted to review the regulations in any case. So even if we knew at that time it was a wetland definitively, it would not have required a filing with the commission.
Okay, so thank you very much,
Thank you.
appreciate it. And I guess I'd still like to get, Mr. Harvey, I think it's fair to give him one more chance to respond to this. I know we've reached out, the attorneys reached out, but with all this new information, I still think there's, and I think the commission has expressed they'd like to digest what we've seen and heard.
Right. My suggestion would be before that. So let me just ask Tom, Rich, and Nicole. So you're certainly willing to consider new information, review it, and revise your report, in accordance with what you feel would be appropriate. Just you're willing to do that, aren't you?
Yeah, we'd be willing to do that, but in regards to, unless you want us to go in there and get more data and we have permission to do a more precise delineation, we wouldn't change any of that, but it would be more in reference to vegetation removal, I think.
Yes.
From what I hear.
The other thing.
Specific to the vegetation.
Yes. The other thing I need to check, and I think it's fair. I think it's fair to assume that if the commission ends up taking enforcement action, in this case, it's going to be appealed. And one of the first things to remember about enforcement action is, in that case, the burden falls far more on the Conservation Commission to make the case rather than the alleged violator. That there really is, in that, the presumption in that case is really almost lost completely. So the commission needs to keep in mind that if you do take enforcement action, it needs to be able to be upheld under appeal. So one of the things, so I sort of want to both review in general, with town council, I want to review that both in general. Specifically, I want to know council's opinion about, in that kind of a situation, using photographs and oral testimony from abutters.
Yeah.
And because if council does not recommend that, then I don't think we can really ask LEC to include that in any kind of revised report they do. Yeah, sure, they can use Google aerials and other aerials, but something again that's not going to be able to be upheld, in court. I mean, to be frank.
Yeah.
I mean,
If I could I comment to
Sure.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, we've looked at all the Google images. We could look at them again. I'm not opposed to that. And with new information, we could look at some of the areas more in detail. But except for a few of them, the resolution isn't good enough to say anything more definitive. However, there are aerial firms that we could purchase photography from perhaps in the critical years and get a little more detail and resolution and be able to, even to the point of perhaps counting the larger trees. And that would be one way of being a little more definitive about it. Otherwise, it's always a little subjective.
Okay, Tom, well, let's you and I talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
Rich?
Nothing to add at this time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I'm gonna shut it down here. I think this is enough discussion. We've gone longer than I was hoping on this topic, but I think we've covered a lot of ground here. So to the LEC folks, thank you very much for all the help you've done so far.
Thank you.
And appreciate that. And Attorney Costa, thanks very much for giving us your update, your information. So
You're welcome.
at this point, I think we'll come back to this perhaps at the next meeting. We'll talk. I think we need to talk to town council and see how we want to proceed.
Yep.
Does that make sense? Do I see nods?
No, I just one last statement. I mean, I just think that the commission has certainly taken the allegations very seriously, and I just want to say that for the record.
Yep.
Very
Thanks.
seriously.
I quite agree, Chris. Thanks. Okay, let's keep moving here. So next on our agenda, we have we had an MCA. This is the Metro West Conservation Alliance. We had a meeting last week. This is kind of the Sudbury Valley. We've been a member of that for a couple of years now, and so they asked us to participate. I think you guys saw some email about that. Peter and I and David were at the meetings, but Peter, you want to give just a very short, because
Yeah.
we have a lot here, but
yeah.
a short update on.
Yeah,
what
I have a 32-page slide deck. Is that okay?
That's a short version.
Yeah. Hey, short and sweet. 2/3 of our town drains into the Concord River watershed, and there's a couple of, they're called NGOs. They're, nonprofit agencies that look at that whole Concord River watershed, and it's basically, 35 towns from Chelmsford, roughly south along 495. So, long story short, they are doing a watershed survey to generate recommendations to the member communities on how to make the water quality better. I mean, that's a gross simplification, but that includes, potential land acquisition, that includes all kinds of things to make the watershed better. And the reason I think that's important to our town is most of our open space, right, is along watershed. Well, it's all in a watershed. That's how watersheds are defined. But we've got a lot of open space that's actually in the streams that feed into these rivers. So bottom line is we'll work with them and see what comes of it and see what their ideas are on how Chelmsford and other communities can contribute to keep the water quality good in this big watershed.
Okay. Thanks, Peter. Next on our agenda is the report from our planning board liaison. Hello, Chris.
Good evening. Since your last meeting on December 10th, we've had 2 regular meetings, a work session, and a very brief joint meeting with the Select Board to appoint our new associate member of the Planning Board, Marcy Comtois.
Are you saying we've been slacking?
Yeah.
I know.
The ADU bylaws have taken up some time.
Yeah, well, he got offended by our 20-minute short meeting record that, you got to.
But Marcy has been nominated as the associate member until the April election on the board. So we have been working on the ADU zoning bylaw for the January 27th special town meeting. We are working through some minor zoning changes for Springtown meeting, zoning bylaw changes for Springtown meeting, based on some recommendations from the Attorney General's office. We are in the middle of discussing potential Kate's Corner zoning improvements, potentially coming to Springtown meeting. And at our last meeting, we did review 4 Palet Drive, and we reviewed the Aquifer Protection Gap Analysis Scope, which I believe is on your agenda as well. And we did request that the consulting group does come before the full board at an upcoming meeting for discussion, rather than having a subcommittee work on it and then come to the board after that. I also wanted to mention that we do have a recommendation from the planning board on, a request from you, from the planning board regards to 4 Palet Drive. I didn't know if you wanted me to mention that now or during the hearing.
Why don't you mention it now?
Okay, so there is some, in the new plans, there will be 4 parking spaces in the back of the building as reserved parking spaces for snow emergencies. There was some discussion, I know at one of your past meetings, about increasing green space. There's a potential trade-off to moving the parking lot away from the wetlands and losing that green space and emergency parking. Our recommendation, if that was only green space, we wouldn't have an issue with that. But because that also now serves as emergency parking, the planning board recommends that we not lose those 4 spaces. If we do, there's a potential that it might have to be redesigned yet again. So
When you say lose, you mean keep the 4 spaces?
Yes.
Is the board's
Yeah,
preference?
because the trade-off is that with those 4 spaces in green space, it pushes the parking lot closer to the wetlands.
Right.
If we get rid of those,
Right.
we can move it away.
And it was like a dozen before?
I think we should wait till the hearing to
Yeah,
really get
yeah.
into
Yeah.
this detail.
Just,
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's our recommendation, is that we don't lose those.
got it.
And I can
We
clarify
got the
more.
trade-off, I think, and
Can you
we'll
just
we'll
give us
dial
a
that in.
definition of emergency parking places?
You'll hear more about it in the
Okay.
hearing, but if I need to come up and explain a little bit more, then I can.
Okay.
You're sticking around?
Yeah, I
Okay,
will.
all right, let's move on then. In fact, it'll be shortly, I think. So next is our, thank you, Chris. Next is our regulatory hearing. So we're now getting into the regulatory hearing section of the meeting. So we are now at a RDA after the fact filing. This is continued from December 10th from our last meeting. This is Johnny and Catherine Ramos from 35 Brick Kiln Road. And David, do we have a request for continuance?
Yes, we do. I can just give a quick update, preliminary to voting the continuance. So the Ramoses have hired Norse Environmental to do the restoration plan. I met on site with Catherine and Maureen Harold from Norse last week. So I can vouch that, this is being addressed, this is being worked on. And so the plan is to have Maureen present the restoration plan at the February 11th meeting. So Catherine has requested a continuance till then.
Okay. I'll take a motion to
I move,
continue.
Mr. Chairman, that we continue this matter until our meeting on February 11th.
Second.
Motion from Chris, second from Mark, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion's approved, all unanimous. Thank you very much on that. Next on our agenda is the notice of intent. Also, this one's continued from November 12th. This is Kathy Romberg, 4 Palet Drive, and it looks like Casey is coming up to podium, so.
Thank you. Casey.
David, do you have anything to set up on this, or do we just go right to the new plan from Casey?
Maybe Casey can just talk a little bit about the current revisions and what led to them.
Actually, I'll just state, we had 2 participants, I think it was Bill and Mark,
Yes.
participated in, and you, David,
Yes.
in the session that was done in early December, I think it was.
I believe so.
With a number of parties present, and the outcome of that meeting is this new plan.
That is
Am I-
correct.
Am I correct? Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Carl.
Casey Ferrero with Howard Stein Hudson. Thank you for having us. Chris covered most of it. No, I'm just kidding. So from the previous plan, like you said, we had a kind of a joined meeting. Fire chief, engineering, planning, conservation had members, but also some of the abutters were also present, and we kind of discussed what are the options that could be kind of a balance or a medium between fitting all of the parking on site, and then what if we could still maintain to use some of the cul-de-sac that would be, technical, legal, on-street, parallel parking that's available everywhere else, but also safely, to which the fire chief could agree that he can maneuver, or they can maneuver their apparatus in a safe manner, and we can designate those locations that he needs as no parking. So what you'll find is, David, if you just scroll to the layout plan, please. Is that what's up there? So we have a parking lot in the rear, which is 7 spaces. So we have, 7 spaces at the rear, 4 spaces at the front. Those 4 spaces at the front are located within an existing pavement area. It's important to note that we do still have to be a reduction to the front of the property, to meet stormwater standards and to be a better product overall to improve the stormwater quality coming off. We still have to be a reduction in the front, so we can't use all of the impervious that's up front. Just because we have no way to treat it, no way to capture it, no way to do anything with it, without impeding on the town's right of way and then adding treatment to the town's responsibility. It just wasn't an option. So
Is everyone seeing the 4 spaces that are staying up front? That's one, right?
Well, no, those aren't the 4 spaces. There's 4 spaces directly in front of the building that are on our property.
Okay.
So
this is one right here, and if you could just point those out, please,
Correct.
Casey.
So we have the 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4 directly within
Okay.
existing pavement right in front of the building.
Okay, thank you.
So that totals us to 11 permanent parking spaces within, I guess, what we would call, a paved and curbed or, area where stormwater is taken care of. That leaves us with a net to make up of 5 parking spaces. So, we showed a cul-de-sac exhibit of sorts to where we could safely park 5 parking spaces within the cul-de-sac. Tony made it clear we're not allowed to stripe any parking within the cul-de-sac, but we're allowed to show where, based on parking standards, a typical parallel parking space is 10 by 22, so 10 feet wide, 22 feet long. Could we get 5 of these in the cul-de-sac safely and still show the fire truck turning around? We did show 5. Again, we have them here. They're shown with line work, but they're not to be striped. We have to be clear that they're not going to be striped out there. What we are going to stripe is the no parking locations for the fire department. And also the trash receptacle is also going to have a no parking striping in front of it. So again, we have 11 on site with 5 off site. But then came the problem of, so what happens in a snow ban emergency where the town calls a parking ban, you're not allowed to park on the streets. We still have to have somewhere for these five cars to go. So what we thought of, and one of the comments that we received from a Conservation Commission member at the joint meeting was, it would be nice if the kids had at least something left over so that they weren't forced to be in the cul-de-sac, weren't forced to go in the pavement. Whether they stay in the cul-de-sac, whether they use the grass, that's up to the kids and what they want to do. If they want to throw a ball back and forth, or if they want to rollerblade, right? There's two different locations to do that. But so we expanded based on that request, at least to some extent, that green space that's immediately behind the building. And that actually doubles in use, as Chris brought up now, as we can fit four cars in there for parking. And ultimately, that's going to be up to the responsibility of the owner and the management company of the property to clear those if they're not used before the snow starts, or likely the cars will be there before the snow starts because the parking ban is called, a day or two ahead in advance of a snowstorm. As Chris mentioned, the trade-off of having that green space is expanded is this design versus the last design didn't save really any trees from the rear of that property, just due to the construction, the grading that had to happen in order to get the pond in. And then we also have a swale that goes around the pond for that existing parking lot that drains across our site. So instead of now accepting that into our pond, we have the room now to redirect that around, which is best practice in most scenarios. We don't want to be responsible for anybody else's drainage anyway. We'd rather give it a path to get from point A across our property to its end destination anyway. So as Chris mentioned, there was a trade-off in allowing that green space to remain, using that green space for the parking that we needed. And it's just snowban emergency parking. It's not going to be used on a day-to-day basis. However many times they have a snowban in a year, what's it been lately? 2 times, maybe 3 times, in a bad year, 5. So again, we're asking for that trade-off from the Conservation Commission to allow us to have, overall, we still have a smaller parking lot in the back. There's some less impervious space in the back that's draining towards this pond that's, exiting to the wetland. We added green space. And I think that kind of covers the layout changes. The drainage changes were essentially the same drainage as we were before. The entire intent is the exact same. We have new pavement that we're accepting through the same TSS unit, which is called a Rain Guardian. I know I've presented it to you 100 times on different projects. This is a different unit of the Rain Guardian, but it still does the same thing. It accepts stormwater, it treats it before it discharges it through the back of the unit. It goes from that discharge unit to the pond where it is able to stage, infiltrate, and then exit. The exit is defined in the same, I believe it was the last plan we had changed the exit from being just the overflow weir into a discharge, an outlet control structure. So what this outlet control structure allows it to do is slowly drain over time rather than all staging up and then dumping over at the same time. So that allows us to meet our flow requirements with much less pond and much less area used and disturbed for that pond than if we didn't have that outlet control structure at all. So if I'll just actually, can you go to the next plan, David, where I'll talk through this? So I will mention, so this outlet control structure is here, buried somewhat into the side of the berm of the pond. Because the pond is not very deep, and because the pond is also not very, the berm doesn't rise up very high, the outlet, or the orifice, and then the outlet of that pipe has to be pretty low, level with, or just below the outlet, or the bottom of that pond. The only location we could get to then outlet that pipe is at this elevation 99 and change. The only location where we can achieve this elevation does happen to pull right at the buffer zone, the 25-foot no disturb buffer zone. So there is going to be minor disturbance to a couple feet within the 25-foot disturbance to pull that grading back, create that low spot for us to outlet, and then also replace with some riprap to prevent the erosion from everything coming out of that pipe. So there will need to be some disturbance within the 25-foot to get this pipe in. And again, the benefit of this pipe is that we can slowly drain this pond over time instead of creating a much larger pond that has to detain everything to meet that flow requirement for the stormwater standards. And then actually, I'll just, while I'm up here, so this is the swale that we designed going around. So there's all this pavement and parking from this existing building on Tingsboro Road. Before, the plan where this kind of intersected us was right in the middle of our parking lot. So we had to accept it and we had to put it through our pond, where we have this benefit now where we can swale it up and around and it doesn't have to touch our BMPs and our maintenance system or our stormwater system. it's much preferred to just add a swale going around so that we can let them act on their own and let them have a bypass through our property, then accept it into our own. I believe that summarizes the changes, or goes through all the changes that we have on the plan. I will note, I did talk to Sheila. She issued a letter before the planning board meeting. It had one comment on it related to standard 3. I know there's another letter related to flood storage that's we're working on with Sheila now. I called Sheila and talked to her about her standard 3 comment. You should be seeing that come through anytime with a revised letter.
That's stormwater.
No, that's bordering land subject to flooding. That's what she's talking about, right?
Sorry, there's actually 2 standard 3s. She had a question on standard 3 of bordering land and then also the stormwater. So yes, the stormwater one is solved. You'll see a revised letter from her at some point. Probably it'll be in the same time that we solve. So we're still working on clarifying for her the bordering land subject to flooding. But I know she had an outstanding question on that we're still working on with her.
Okay, all right. David, do you have comments?
So I'm sorry, Casey. I'm confused about how adding the green space is a trade-off. It's a trade-off, not adding it or adding it is a trade-off between what and what? Yeah.
So if we don't have this green space here, we now no longer have area for 4 cars to park in the event of a snow emergency. So where we'd have to add it is likely on this back end, which would push this back out anyway, but you'd also have the vehicles on the grass closer to the buffer zone rather than away from it, and where all of this drains directly into our treat systems anyway. The trade-off originally came from one of the comments was that, he'd like to see something in this area just to have a location for kids to play. So that's where the change originally came from. It just also doubled as this is a location we could put this parking that we need to have anyway, because I can't have a snowban event where now I have 5 people that are just unable to park and they need to go drive through the whole snowstorm because they can't stop anywhere.
But whether it's green space or paved, you're still getting it farther away from the wetlands. So
Correct.
I don't.
Well, the trade-off in general was that with this green space here, this whole thing moved this way. So the whole, when we originally showed it, when we went to that joint meeting, I don't know where the best place to stand is.
That's good.
But we
That's
showed
good.
everything about 15 feet further away this direction. So everything we showed at that joint meeting was approximately 15 feet further away from the wetland.
But it's not the insertion of green space that's driving it. It's the emergency parking, the need for the emergency parking.
Actually came second. That came as here's the space now that we have to do this. Originally, the emergency parking, we were planning on trying to fit on areas around where we had green space, but it just came up that if the preference was to have green space immediately at the adjacent of the back of the building for multiple uses, whether it's children or a picnic or whatever, well, we also have this space now that we can add these parking spaces in.
But you can do that and still keep it as green space.
Correct.
I think that's what you're saying.
So it's going to be, I guess I should have mentioned, the landscaping material that we're going to use is a reinforced grass type material that's going to have some kind of stone base at the bottom to give it some strength. And then also you're going to have your typical grass on top that's not going to be driven over on a daily basis either. So it's going to maintain its strength and toughness throughout the seasons.
Okay.
Can you give a verbiage that's going to keep people off that? It's going to rely on the owner.
What is it?
To use that only in emergencies. I mean, how
That's
you
going to be completely on the owner and the management company to make sure that they're not parking on it on a daily basis, yes.
That's
Why don't we
important.
start, Mark? Any more questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. No. Casey, go ahead. You still talking?
No, I think
No,
he was,
no,
he
go
was-
ahead.
I think you were done, right?
Yeah, I'm all set.
It's a vast improvement over what originally was proposed to us. But there was no room to get anything around a dumpster. I can see that, right? There's a pole
in the
there?
front there?
Yeah.
So what's actually in front of the dumpster, unfortunately, there's a pole, but what you're not showing on this plan is the guy wire that holds the pole up, stretches all the way to the dumpster.
Okay.
So that area immediately next to the dumpster is actually what we're removing pavement from, and we're gonna grass all that, and that's how we're balancing what we're adding for pavement and what we're removing in
Okay.
front.
I just think that during the summer months, they're gonna park where they're parking now. This isn't, they're gonna go back to their old habits. you know?
The only thing we can do about that is have the management company be on top of them. I mean,
This is-
if the police are called and they're enforced, that's what happens. But, you know, from our perspective as the engineers, all I can do is put that responsibility onto the owner and the owner's management company to make sure that they're parking where they need to be parking.
Yeah. No, it's not great, but it's the best of what, I think, this is what you do. I got nothing else.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pleased with the changes, honestly. I mean, I see a lot less asphalt pavement than we had in the previous plan. So we've traded off asphalt pavement and we've replaced it with green space and lawn. And so, yeah, I'm really pleased with the fact that we were able to get together and hammer out some changes to address the concerns that were raised by the public. So I'm happy with this.
Okay, Peter?
Rather than ask a million questions, so, Mark, you and Bill went to the meeting, right? And so I gather you're comfortable with, given the constraints, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
you spent time thinking about this and you're cool with it?
I went back and forth, and
Yeah.
there's no trees disturbed this way.
There are trees.
Oh,
So I did mention in the presentation that, you know, with adding that green space in and then having the swale that goes around the parking, we're at the same limited disturbance essentially as we were before. And that comes from, you know, even if we're leaving it as grass, we still have to grade it to get that swale in. We still have to grade it to put that pond in, and then moving it over that 15 feet. You know, there is more grass involved in the entire area now,
Yeah.
having the grass in the beginning, the grass at the end, but we are disturbing still.
But Casey, you confused me. You said that the location of the pond, or the infiltration basin, or whatever we call it, moved on the map to the left about 15 feet?
From the previous plan
Yeah,
to the exhibit that we showed at the meeting, where we had the parking basically directly abutting the rear of the building.
yeah.
No grass in between it. So then when we add the grass between the parking and the building, everything shifted back over.
And you mentioned, thank you, you mentioned that the infiltration basin is smaller?
It is smaller in size.
So how come there's not more trees left? That's where I'm getting mixed
Because
up.
now we have a swale that redirects the top pavement to
Oh.
keep it separate from our system that goes around the outside of the pond as well. So before, the pond was our limit of disturbance. Now we have an additional swale because we want to separate their stuff from our stuff.
And then quickly, you know, our commission is supposed to look out for flooding. We've talked a lot about that. So I'd be curious what our town engineer's position is, or if, you know, Tony and Sheila have looked at that question. It's just, yeah.
So are you talking about flooding or flood storage? Because they're
Well,
two separate.
flooding of the water that may bypass this whole process, this whole
Right.
site
So that's
drawing into-
calculated in
into
standard
Duncher
two.
Drive, the Duncher, I'm thinking the Duncher Drive residents' concerns,
Mm-hmm.
which sounded to me like more than just this property, by the way. The whole
Right.
water thing is somewhat beyond the jurisdiction, I think, of this one property. But that is a question. So I don't know if our DPW has looked at that specifically with the new design?
I know that they reviewed our design with compliance to standard 2, which is the
Yeah.
flow rate and flow volume. They are in agreement that we are a reduction overall of both flow rates and flow volumes to that wetland and to the systems that
Yeah.
tribute to that wetland. I also know that they do have an overarching concern regarding the area that they are looking into
Right.
outside of this project that was happening before this project came up.
Right, so excuse me, I'm sorry, just in the interest of time. I guess that's my question. You know, because our town engineers are looking at the whole area, what's their opinion on the impact of this design? I
Well-
would be interested in that question.
But there's also the limit of what I can do out.
Oh, yeah,
You
no,
know,
I understand that.
I have to meet the standards on my property, and I have no control over what the town looks to do or wants to do outside of my property. So if I can show that I am improving it at least to some sense in my property, I meet the standards that I have to.
Yeah, that's the stormwater standard. Our commission's goal is to try to mitigate flooding in general. So let's table that as just a question. Then just finally, what's interesting about this design is your previous design, you ended up treating the neighbor's runoff kind of by default, because you had to. And under this design, you don't. And I believe that would be considered your legal obligation to worry about your property, not the neighbor's. So that's just an interesting artifact of the changed design. We're sort of trading off, we sort of got free treatment.
Right.
With the old design, we sort of got freebie treatment of somebody else's runoff, which isn't your responsibility, though. So that's all I had.
But I mean, you're not making, with regard to treatment, the situation isn't being made any worse.
Right.
I would think if you were going to technically look at it, we're still providing treatment. There is TSS treatment in water quality swales, provided that they have a sediment forebay at the head of them. I would argue that the existing pond they have at the rear would act as the sediment forebay, and then it discharges to our swale as if it was a water quality swale. I'm not going to take credit for that. I'm not going to be responsible for maintaining a water quality swale just because it's somebody else's.
Yep.
But I would say, in theory, it would improve. I'm just not going to require that, my client be responsible for maintaining a water quality swale.
But just to be clear, that the stormwater standards for redevelopment do require an improvement.
Correct.
Yes, a net improvement anyway.
A net improvement.
And are we meeting that with this design?
Well, so technically our property is not a redevelopment. So we are held to the full standards of we have two portions of our property. The rear of the property where that part comes in is not a redevelopment.
But it's adding impervious surface.
Correct. It's a development, not a redevelopment. A redevelopment requires a reduction in impervious surface. We add 5,000 and change square feet to the rear. So we're held to the full standards, not the redevelopment standards. So we meet all of the full standards for discharging to a wetland. The front of the property where we have separated is where we meet redevelopment standards, and to have just an improvement upon the existing water quality and water flow.
Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Peter. Bill?
I think this is the best compromise you could come up with based on that meeting we went to. Everyone seemed to want to reduce the size of the parking lot in the back. And I was the one that brought up the green space for the kids to play, give them some place to play where that area where the overflow parking for the snow, you've got that area. So we reduced the parking, you got some green space, you've installed that swale to go around, so you're not treating the water from the abutters. And the fire department was pretty much driving the whole thing with the cul-de-sac as far as parking. So you satisfied them by putting the striped areas, no parking spots.
Correct.
And implying that you could park in the circle without the markings.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of, everybody gave in a little bit. We reduced the parking, size of the parking lot. You reduce the size of that pond in the back because you've got the swale now. So I think this is pretty much the best that could be done for that site, because the parking drove it in the front, that cul-de-sac and the fire department. Now, I had one question. So I like the plan. I appreciate you looking at the green space where you put the pavers in for the area for kids to play, because kids live in that apartment, those apartments. And I just had a question. So do you need a waiver from us for the 25-foot because of the outlet?
Yes, because of the outlet controls, the outlet of the outlet control structure.
Did you have to get waivers from the planning board on parking, amount of parking?
So no, actually, as an existing use, they can't hold us to a required parking amount, but I still have to meet special permit criteria for waivers from the landscape buffers and all that stuff. So there's still special permits that they have to give us, just that the parking number is not one of them.
Okay. So all in all, I think putting everybody together in that room, everybody gave in a little bit, everybody understood that we had to do something to help these people get parking for a building that was built 60-something years ago. So I think this is the best plan you could come up with, so I appreciate what you did.
Thanks, Bill. John?
I agree 100% with Bill. For what he's got to work with, that green space is a big option. And that was a smart option. So, I mean, if you gotta go into the 25-foot to regrade, gonna be taken care of right away once they regrade it. I'm comfortable with this plan.
Okay, all right. It's unfortunate, it seems that we're still gonna be losing trees, but that's the,
What kind of trees are they?
A lot of them are infested with billows. I don't know if any of them are willows.
Tell me there's one willow.
if it's wet, if it's wet, there's maybe willows. Okay, all
Swamp
right, so,
maples?
David, we still waiting for DPW then?
Yes.
We wanna see that letter before
Yes.
I think we vote on anything here.
Operation and maintenance, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Take care of that.
Is there an O&M plan that we'll have with this?
So I will note, there is an O&M plan that was in your package. One of the requests from the planning board was if Concom seemed to want to go in the direction of the current plan and not request major changes, really the only thing that was outstanding for planning board was to add snow storage to the O&M plan, and, curbing to the O&M plan, line striping to the O&M plan. And that was the gist of what the planning board really asked for, unless Chris remembers anything differently. But so that is going to be forthcoming to you tomorrow. We've made those changes, anticipating hopefully a positive direction for this meeting tonight. So that'll be submitted tomorrow, so that on the planning board's meeting of next week, hopefully we can get a closeout.
And this will require a SWIP and a land disturbance permit from DPW, right?
So it is a public meeting, and we do have abutters. I'm open to any comments from the neighbors. I'd hope that it's new comments as opposed to, we've heard a lot already, but happy to hear comments and have folks come on up. Make sure you state your name and your address.
Michelle Caputo Starkweather, 19 Dunshire Drive. So I went to the meeting on December 10th, and I left going, okay, best we're going to get, less decimation to the buffer zone, and they get a smaller parking lot. I keep hearing there was a compromise, but they get a parking lot, we have decimated buffer zone. I'm extremely concerned that 16 trees are coming down. All the shrubbery, all the wildlife that lives in that little area, done. This, to me, is part of the Conservation Committee's job, and I'm actually pretty infuriated that I'm being told I've been compromised, because I'm feeling compromised, not that I got a compromise. The buffer zone, I don't care how you come up with plantings, but they should be appropriate. Deciduous trees, shrubbery, I listened to the nice attorney here who was like, oh yeah, the buffer zones are actually a wetland resource area. So I am feeling very strongly. We know that there's an illegally paved parking lot for both the Frank Brock's area that you own and on the Fort Paylett property. I don't care where the plantings go as long as they're appropriate for that wetlands area. Arborvitaes aren't going to cut it in a wetlands area, and they're not going to provide the appropriate wetlands and wildlife cover. If it was perfectly fine to fill in every buffer zone and then just put a little retention pond there so that it handles the water, we wouldn't have any conservation committees and we wouldn't have any wetlands rules. They don't do the same thing. They do something similar, but there's a reason it's really important that we protect our wetlands, and I'm not hearing that, and I'm very, very disappointed. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'd like to speak.
Yep, go ahead.
So, Sarita Fernandez, 27 Dunshire Drive. My apologies for not being in person there today, but I do have a few comments. I thought that beyond what he had showed today, there were still a few other revisions that was requested from the planning board, such as no storage of snow along the edge of Dunshire Drive properties of that parking lot. And also there was still an issue with the recycling that wasn't being put on the plan and the fact of it not being able to be picked up. I don't see that, so if it was been done, maybe you can point it out. The other comment that I heard about, parking and the old habits, the thing to note here is the residents of that property were asked to park parallel in that cul-de-sac for over a year and they haven't done it once. So I'll be very surprised after all of this work that they're going to actually park parallel in those 4 spaces or 5, whatever's there. And just to comment a little bit, I didn't see in this plan plantings. We do know that this project's going to have a negative impact on the local ecosystem. You know, we know it's going to affect various wildlife. We do have a huge population of small mammals, such as stoats. We have a lot of migratory birds. We have red-tailed hawks, Cooper hawks, groundhogs. There's a ton in that area. I mean, they come through my yard all the time. I see them move. We have foxes. And I really would like to advocate, due to this, loss of environment, that they're going to plant something, and going on the previous comments, some native bushes, possibly some flowering bushes, some sort of trees in any area that's possible, just to compensate for a portion of that habitat loss. I don't see any promotion of the biodiversity, in that area. So really, my ask here is there any way for them to restore a small portion of the vital habitats that we have, that we're losing, with any plantings that can accommodate that? And that's something that I think that the Conservation Committee should and be able to help with. And that's what I have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
One more, okay.
Amelia Caputo Starkweather, 19 Dunshire Drive. Just going on that similar vein, we have a lot of wildlife, and I have big concerns. They're taking down 16 trees. If we're adjacent to their property behind there you go long. And if we wanted to remove a tree in our yard, we would be required to come before you, probably, and you would say replace it with something else. So it seems like they're getting quite differential treatment about removing 16 trees in a buffer zone and not having to replace anything. And I just am very concerned. Trees help with flood control. They provide habitat. That area back there where they're going to be clearing out is all wilded. There's deciduous leaf litter. There's all sorts of wood on the ground. Like, animals are back there. And so, just somewhere on their property. I get, the bylaw that says parking lots have to have a buffer, that they're asking for a variance for is directly running against their property. But if they could plant something somewhere on their property to help offset some of the damage, that seems like a reasonable, good neighborly thing to do for them to have to offset some of the destruction they have to do. Because they gave a smaller parking lot, but they're taking up the nearly identical footprint. There's a little more grass, but the destruction is essentially the same. And for many of us, it's not the size of the parking lot that we care about. It's the destruction. And if it's smaller, but it destroys just as much, we don't feel like that's a compromise. We feel very deceived by what we left the December joint meeting with to what we've been presented as the compromise. And so I would hope that could be taken into consideration, some degree of mitigation to the damage. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any
Comments?
Go ahead, Casey.
Unless you want me to respond, I really don't have any will.
Okay. Any more comments here, Peter? You sound like you had something to say.
Well, yeah, so I've been thinking about this whole habitat thing too, as you guys know that I always do. And it's not clear to me, Casey, you can help me, but it's not clear whether you are proposing some sort of shrubbery or trees, but let me give you the second half before you respond. And it's not clear to me where you'd put them, because there are engineering requirements for designing these stormwater basins, and we got a site here that, let's face it, is too small. If it was a new property before the boards would have the latitude, and you'd probably have the space, but given it's an old property, there's some limits. So I guess the real question is, you must have thought about this, where can you stick in shrubs and trees?
Well, so there's that question. Where can you stick them in, and everything that we've designed function the way we want it to design? But then there's also, and you kind of touched on this, typically when I'm before you, I am proposing something that is brand new that I am planning on hopefully making money for the person that's coming in as the applicant. This is not that scenario. So whether or not we're ending up planting, what we're trying to do is be as cost cognizant for the applicant in order to make this happen. This wasn't her decision. She didn't want to come in and build a parking lot. And I understand whether or not the neighbors have agreements or disagreements with that, but I've been told 100 times by her, if I can find a way for her to not have to build this parking lot, let's do it, right? So in the vein that there's habitat loss, I do feel for that. But at the same time, this is not something that she's coming in here so that she can line her pockets and leave with a whole lot more money. She's going to leave in a net negative and a severe net negative, and I'm trying to mitigate that net negative as much as possible so that this damage to her and the way they run this building doesn't last forever. So I guess in essence what we're asking is just we're trying our very best to be as cognizant for the wetlands, for the buffer zones as possible. We'd like to keep the cost in mind for what the construction is potentially to be.
So are you saying that the owner wishes to negatively impact Chelmsford's wetland values, let me finish, and negatively impact the neighbors' concerns over both visual and the whole flooding thing because they want to save a few bucks? Because that's not how our regulations read.
That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is they would prefer to not have to do any of this and disturb any of the buffer zone at all. But since they're forced to have to get the parking off of the street and satisfy their own parking requirements, they're trying to do that in the most cost-effective way possible. And one of the ways to do that.
I get it, but I don't have any sympathy for the cost-effective part of this. I do as a homeowner, and if I had to do this, I wouldn't be happy. But the fact is, this property needs a bit of an upgrade because of the fire chief's concerns, and we need to find a way to help mitigate some of the loss of these trees. The problem I have is I don't know how to do that, and I'm looking at you as the creative engineer to help us.
So what we have proposed is a net positive on stormwater treatment. What we have now is an improvement to the front, which drains to that mitigation ditch. We have an improvement on volume, we have an improvement on quality, and then we have an improvement in the rear where 90% or more of all the TSS coming off of this or all of the stormwater coming off this property is hitting 90% TSS before it even gets to the wetland itself.
Yeah, but we're not talking about the stormwater and water quality. We're talking about habitat.
But as a wetland, that is still part of wetland conservation.
Sure, but we're talking about something different. You're changing the subject. Please don't do that.
I'm saying how we are in trade-off providing something that's better and requesting to not have to provide something else that provides a benefit.
Casey, I understand that. My question was, can you as a creative engineer find some way to put in some vegetation and some habitat type things? You must have thought about that. But that's really the question, I think, before this board. Can we make it better?
What about down here, south of the proposed parking area and north of the property line? Is there anything you could do down here? It's only showing, on this plan, it's only showing a couple of existing trees that would seem nominally just like some additional trees could be planted there, maybe not red oaks.
I wouldn't plant any trees because that's a slope. The slope goes basically from the top of the parking. It's level for a couple feet, and then it drops down at a 3-to-1. So there'd be no trees that would be planted along there. Additionally, that goes down to a fence line that's only going to be a few feet off the curb line there, maybe 10 feet or so.
Well, could the fence be removed?
No, we cannot remove the fence because that is actually one of the portions of the planning board conversations right now is that fence acting as a screening mechanism for the parking lot at the rear and the condition of the fence.
Well, but maybe the neighbors would be agreeable to having the fence removed and replaced with vegetative screening.
I don't think, and we've stated this before, that the vegetative screening would take hold in any amount of time that's going to actually provide any screening in place of what the fence already does, without doing a solid barrier and even if you plant a screening vegetation 2 feet on center, it's going to take 15 years for it to grow tall enough to actually screen anything.
I plan on living that long. Do you?
Come
on. That's not a good. I'm sorry to be so.
But it doesn't take place
cranky.
of the fence that exists.
All right. We hear the comments from the people. I don't think we're voting here tonight on this. We still need to see DPW comments. I'd like to see if there's anything you can do to improve the biodiversity, the habitat, if there's anything that can be done creatively, think outside the box. I hear the comments from the neighbors, and like to see if there's anything that can be done there. David, anything else?
I don't have anything to add at the moment, no.
So I'll take a motion to continue this. Casey, next meeting, or?
Yes, we're going to have revised materials hopefully by tomorrow, so it'll be good for next meeting.
So January 20.
Mr. Chair, I move that we continue this hearing until our next meeting, which is January 28th,
Thank you.
2025.
Okay, motion from Chris,
Second.
second from Bill. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can we just take a 5-minute break?
I was going to do that after the next one, but if you want to take a 5-minute break now, that would be okay too. We will go on hiatus for 5 minutes, returning at 8:42 PM, maybe 8:43. Everyone. Thanks, David, for giving us the chance to collect our breath and see the nature. Okay, so the next on our agenda here is a notice of intent for this is a continuation from November 26th. So a couple of meetings ago, this is 10 Hildreth Street. David, you're going to just start off with a report on your conversation with the National Heritage biologist.
Yes, so here is the email that I had sent to Natural Heritage with some questions. And I did end up speaking to a biologist there whose name escapes me at the moment. Go back and look it up, but we can just go in order here. So first question was, during the course of the notice of intent public hearing, at least one, possibly two certifiable vernal pools have been identified in the bordering vegetated wetlands adjacent to the project site. Although the potential vernal pools are shown on the attached plan, the applicant's representative was asked to also inform your office in writing of the presence of the potential vernal pools. Was this done? And has your office in any case taken the vernal pools into consideration in your decision? So the quick answer is, his reply was yes, that the vernal pools, a little ways off-site have been incorporated into the decision. I asked him how they knew about the vernal pools, and he really did not tell me. He assured me they did know about them. Since I had that conversation with him, I received, or I was CC'd on an email from someone else at Natural Heritage, a biologist who's in charge of certifying vernal pools. I was CC'd on an email to Joel and Ruth Luna. So, obviously they had submitted the information for certification to Natural Heritage. I don't know if the biologist I spoke with knew about that and just wasn't telling me, but they obviously someone at Natural Heritage knows about them, and in fact, in that email, that biologist, that person said that at least one vernal pool had been approved for certification. So I assume that's the one that's closest to the project site. Second question, my understanding is that your office has in past decisions in Chelmsford required a locked chain link fence to be installed to protect priority habitat for nesting turtles. And in fact, I have verified that that office, Natural Heritage, did require a locked chain link fence for a project at 234 River Neck Road, which was built. Chain link fence was installed, and it's unlocked, I guess, a couple times a year for a consultant to get in and survey for nesting turtles. In view of such past decisions, would your office consider amending the current decision to require a chain link fence instead of the currently proposed post and rail fence? So the biologist's answer to that question was he was not involved in that earlier project. He indicated that that office did not have a problem, at least in principle, with the commission requiring a chain link fence for protection, and he would want to make sure you would want it to be reviewed by a herpetologist or some expert to make sure that it would not impede turtle migration. Well, sort of the whole point of the fence would be to impede turtle migration into dangerous areas. But I have more to say on this later as part of the review of my proposed conceptual special conditions. So we'll talk about this one a little more. Third one, although the applicant's representative has not provided the Conservation Commission with a copy of the draft declaration of restriction, he stated during the hearing that it will apply only to parcel X shown on the attached plan. Would your office consider amending the current decision to require that the declaration of restriction also apply to Lot 4, or at least the portion of it located within the 100-foot wetlands buffer zone? So He too told me that he would send me a copy of the Declaration of Restriction, and never did. I don't know why it's so difficult to get a copy of that. But in any case, he said no, that they would not consider amending the Declaration of Restriction. They don't. He said that they don't like to deal with individual small lots in that manner. And they said Parcel X is relatively large, so from their perspective, it made sense to do that. This is another one, though, that again I've included that doing an additional restriction on Lot 4 in my proposed conceptual special conditions, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that as well when we get to that point, which I guess is then the next bullet. Finally, the last one, the commission is also concerned that there has been significant disturbance and alteration of priority habitat on the site over the past several years that was made without the approval of your office. Was this unapproved prior disturbance taken into account in the current decision? And again, his answer, without much of any elaboration, was yes. But again, he didn't really go into detail about how it was, figured into their decision.
Okay, I guess not exactly the most satisfying interaction, but it is what it is.
Yep.
And you can't, I don't think there's an appeal, but you can't, that's it, right?
Right. I don't think there's much more that information or help, for lack of a better word, that we'll get from that office.
Okay. So next on there is for you to discuss your proposed conceptual special conditions.
Yes. So this is as I mentioned before. The first one was a lock chain link fence instead of the proposed split rail fence for permanent turtle protection. I don't know that this needs to be an either or. At least from the commission's perspective, I assume that from the applicant's perspective, that the split it's maybe an issue of aesthetics with regard to the split rail fence. But, there's certainly little doubt in my mind that it does not offer, I don't even think the purpose of it is to protect the turtles. Certainly does not offer the kind of protection that a lock chain link fence would. But I think there's an issue here with, location. Certainly, the proposed split rail fence is located outside the buffer zone. It's located outside of really any areas under the commission's jurisdiction. So, obviously, the question is, does the commission have the legal authority to require a chain link fence, either to replace the proposed split rail fence or maybe possibly in an alternative location, but I think in any case, at least some of it would be outside areas not under the regulatory jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. So I think rather than and I think at the last hearing, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that it was stated that the applicant would not be willing to do a chain link fence. So I think that really a consultation before the commission should attempt to require that a consultation with town council needs to be made, and I think there are probably 3 or 4 interrelated questions here. I think certainly one question. The first question would be, can the commission require a chain link fence out in areas outside of the buffer zone or other areas under its jurisdiction? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, then maybe the next question is, well, can the commission peer review the proposed, maybe it would end up being peer reviewing Natural Heritage decision, but with the thought of is there additional protection that can be offered for the turtles, in particular, a chain link fence. And if just say for the sake of discussion here, if the answer to that question is yes, then if the commission did get a peer review of that, and the result was, or the report came back from whoever consultant was hired, that with recommendations, a chain link fence or something would better protect the turtles. At that point, can the commission then require the fence? If the result of peer review said, yeah, that's really what should be done to protect the turtles. I mean, I think if it were possible that the commission could require that, it would be much more likely to be under the bylaw, because the bylaw does explicitly say that the commission has to protect rare species habitat. So those are, I can think a little bit more about that before I actually talk to town council, but I think those are the kinds of questions that should be asked of town council.
Okay.
Next one is restoration of wooded habitat in the 100-foot buffer zone. Maybe I'll just bring up this plan here. Commission recalls that this plan actually does show the upland habitat. If you look really closely, you can say you can see the UH flags. So it would just be a matter. I mean, it's not rocket science. It would be just a matter of doing some restoration in between those flags and the buffer zone, because of course the commission really can't go outside the buffer zone or its regulatory jurisdiction. And in this particular case, it would be really for the benefit of the vernal pool critters, because again, it's been stated over and over again that the vernal pool critters live in, outside of vernal pool season, live in upland habitat, upland wooded habitat. So it would just be a matter of requiring, in the order of conditions, requiring submission of a restoration plan for this area of the buffer zone, between 100 feet and the upland habitat. It's a relatively small area. It's it should be something that a wetland botanist could do, or even an arborist could do that. To suggest appropriate upland tree species. And then the next one is additional restriction document for Lot 4, which is, of course, this lot right here. I've done that sort of thing in other towns. It wouldn't be a full-blown Chapter 184 restriction that, like we're going through with Warren Pole or Coulis. It would be short of that. It would be more like sometimes what the Board of Health in towns with Title V systems. I don't know, maybe it's done in this town as well in certain situations, but like a deed restriction that then gets recorded in the chain of title on the property. Again, I can certainly, I've drafted those sorts of things in other towns. You could certainly do that in this case, maybe with the help of town council. I think, there would also be, a perpetual condition or conditions in the order of conditions that refer to, the buffer zone never being disturbed on this lot. But again, I think it would be just as much to make the owners, the future owners, aware of it, to have another document in addition to it that gets recorded in the chain of title on the property. And then the next one is, I didn't really, in the natural heritage letter approving it, I mean, I really didn't see much of anything that pertained to monitoring and reporting of, use of the nesting area or the proposed nesting area. Now maybe they have something in mind. I don't know that they didn't include, but I think, we do have precedent for that already with 93 Brick Hill Road. I think it would be essentially the same conditions. I think there was a 5-year monitoring and reporting period, after construction of the turtle nesting area, with things information like species using it, conditions at the time. I go back and review that and maybe work with your office as well on that. So.
Okay, all right. Brian, do you have any comments or questions or anything to present?
For the record, Brian Goodrew with Hancock Associates. Not really. What I had passed out was the latest plan of the subdivision. It was back from October. I believe David couldn't find that copy.
I did not have that, no.
So he has it now. I resent the PDF, and he asked that I bring those copies. So it hasn't been changed since October. We haven't done anything since then. And then we just got these potential conditions today. I haven't had a chance to talk with our team about it. My only ask would be, if you're talking to town council about the fence, I would also bring up the requirements for the turtle nesting monitoring, because that also falls outside of jurisdictional areas, and that's covered by the natural heritage.
No, not completely, Brian. Where's the plan?
I would still request that town council opine on
sure.
that jurisdiction.
But, I mean, you can see right here that a good chunk of the nesting area, which is down here, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's in bordering land subject to flooding.
Floodplain, correct.
So that is well within the commission's regulatory jurisdiction, at least geographically. But yeah, I will also.
Please,
ask
thank you.
council about that.
And that's it. No other comments or questions at this time.
Okay. Questions from the commission? John, do you have anything?
Right now, I think, with this chain link fence, where are we talking? Behind lot 4?
Optimally, it would go completely around the rare species habitat, which is this line right here, like that. As I say, that's optimally so. But again, I think I would recommend that the commission get some kind of expert opinion on recommendations for the exact location of the fence.
Because I thought there was a fence behind that single house, split rail fence or something. Chris talked about.
That may be true, but again, a split rail fence is not going to really keep the turtles from like going into the lawn or over here going in to the cul-de-sac, or the road. So that is the concern.
You said some of it's outside the buffer zone, that chain link fence?
Yeah, just this right here is the proposed split rail fence.
Right,
So just again, for the sake of discussion, if that were replaced with a chain link fence, yeah, that is outside.
Right.
That's outside the buffer zone, it's outside the floodplain. So the commission may not be able to actually require anything there in the absence of an agreement from the applicant, but, I mean, just for the sake of thoroughness, anything else, just like to verify that. Maybe, I mean, the commission might be able to require a split rail fence running along the floodplain like that. I'm not sure that's in the best interest of the turtles, and, I'm not sure that makes much sense, so.
Well, the split rail fence behind that house was just to delineate
That's what
the area where people.
Yeah, that's the primary purpose for that,
Right,
but
now
it's
this is
not.
something different with the turtles.
Right, this is to keep the turtles from going up into the road, into yards where, they might be removed and disposed of.
Well, it's the nesting thing. They tend to go upland into our backyards and lay eggs, and then we mow them over.
Especially these rare species are particularly migratory. And as I say, and I will point it out to town council, that there is precedent for requiring a split rail fence. Of course, that was Natural Heritage that did that. I'm sorry, a chain link fence. Of course, that was Natural Heritage, and, they of course do have that kind of authority.
Yeah. All right.
So, hope that answers your question.
Sean, anything else?
Could you do some of the chain link in the area outside our jurisdiction, the split rail? Or not even a split rail, anything outside our jurisdiction, no fence?
Yeah, I did not, I don't think the commission, I think just about guaranteed the commission would not have that authority unless there's a compelling reason, if at all, for protecting them. Because the commission is required to protect rare species.
Well, what makes it work is being contiguous.
Yep. Yeah.
So you're gonna have to find that out.
Yeah.
And now these septic systems, that's all been designed
Or approved.
or approved?
Septic systems have been designed and submitted to the Board of Health. We have not received approvals.
Okay. So we're waiting on that.
Can I ask why they haven't been approved yet? Do they have issues? Okay. I get it.
Well, there's that letter that Chelmsford Water wrote.
I know, but I haven't heard a response from them.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. And I think, excuse me, aren't they also doing that contamination study follow-up? Board of Health, so maybe that, I can't answer for the Board of Health, but those two are somewhat, they're not totally related, but it's related to the site creating a problem for water.
Let's keep going around. John, anything else?
No, I was
Bill?
just wondering about the septic systems,
Yep.
if they've been approved.
Yep.
Because that's a major factor.
It's a big deal, yeah.
What's a big deal?
I'm good. I got
Mark,
nothing.
anything else? Chris, anything?
No, let's get that legal input.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
Okay. Peter, anything else?
Yeah, I'd like to just share that if I were living there, I would consider the chain link fence excessive, but I would also consider building houses in endangered species habitat excessive, and that is sort of a compromise. I wouldn't like it, but I think that's the right thing if we're trying to protect turtles. The second thing, yeah, David, I kind of agree. The leaf litter in the trees is important. I do want to make a comment. The Natural Heritage letter, you have to forgive me, I worked a lot with attorneys in my life. The Natural Heritage letter, unfortunately, has a huge deficiency that we're probably not going to spend time thinking about. But I got to say this. It says, here's our determination based on the information submitted to us. And we have no idea what information was submitted. And I know you talked about that with this whole thing about did they know about the vernal pool or not. But that's why the response you got from Natural Heritage does concern me, because they didn't actually say clearly we did consider the vernal pool, and we know that the information submitted to us initially did not have a consideration for there being a vernal pool. So I just want to point that out. I don't know where to go with that, but that does concern me about the language in the letter.
Well, I mean, that's, as I mentioned earlier, that might be a question for town council. Does, to what extent, if any, does the commission have the authority to peer review the natural heritage decision? And I mean, this is a form letter, basically.
Right, and I'd like to just express an opinion, having worked with natural heritage. I mean, if they really looked at this and decided no big deal, I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm not second guessing that. I'm just saying, when a letter says, hey, here's what I think based on the information given to me, and you don't know what information was given to them, and, I know it's a form letter, and I'm probably fighting City Hall here, so I'll keep going. Again, I just want to say this. There were alterations to this property before this development plan, the tree cutting and other things that did, I guess violates the right word, the natural heritage designation and some of our own bylaws. And I don't know what this commission wants to do in the case where you have an applicant that clearly comes to us with an existing violation. And we've been talking about violations in general, so maybe it's more of a question of what's our policy going forward. But I just want to mention that and don't want to go any further at this point. And then the final comment, I've had a few discussions with residents concerning flooding, and Dave, I know I've asked you this privately, and I've read the regs, but I want to be clear. This commission's responsibility on flooding is limited to the FEMA flood zone. And we believe, and Brian's been good about explaining this, we believe, I think, correct, that the flooding based on the FEMA flood zone line and based on the engineering calculations that are required, our current best data says we're okay. But we know it's raining harder, and we know there's evidence from the residents of flooding. My read, and David, am I correct, there's not much this commission can do because we are limited to the existing FEMA flood line, and we're kind of limited to the standard engineering calcs that don't account for increased rainfall.
Well,
have I got that correct?
The latter is correct, but I think I'll just
please
correct you a little bit
Please.
with regard to the former. So the commission's legal jurisdiction doesn't extend any further than the 100-year floodplain.
Right.
However, it can certainly extend into the 5-year floodplain or the 10-year floodplain. So if there is evidence brought to this commission that, say, a certain area of the buffer zone is flooding every 2 years or every 5 years, the commission certainly can take that into consideration in any decision it makes, because if you recall, it's one of the 9 interests.
Right.
Is protection of flooding. So you check off the boxes in order of conditions where it says that the commission has determined that the area of the proposed work is plays a role in these 9 interests. Flooding, protection from flooding, or control of flooding being one of them. But I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, or feel free to add to it, I think you have looked extensively at this, haven't you? And you've spoken to, worked with DPW on this. There does not appear to be any evidence or any calculations that show that the buffer zone or is subject to frequent flooding, even though we did get, I think, one video from one of the neighbors, which showed, several years ago, definitely flooding of some of an area down near the wetlands.
I don't want to belabor this, but this is the problem. Everything's set up for a certain amount of flooding based on historical data, and it's raining harder.
Yeah.
But our regs aren't really set up to address that. So I'm still wrestling with what do we do with that? Because we can't go beyond our legal obligation, which is based on old rainfall data. And it's not just our problem, it's a problem everywhere, every commission.
Buy up houses that are repeatedly flooding. But I don't think there's much more we can do in the regulations.
Okay. Thank you. I'm done.
So, David, you have a list of questions for the town council?
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
where we're at the moment, and we want to hear those, the outcome of that discussion. So, okay. It is an open hearing. I would be willing to take a couple of resident questions or citizen comments if that's of interest to anyone. And I see movement, so I guess so. I'm not surprised. Yeah. Hello?
Linda Carney at 17 Hilda Street and 19 Plum Street, and I want to thank Peter for bringing back up the problem that we have with the trees that were taken down before this even started, because we are firm believers in our neighborhood that the lack of tree roots that were taken out is the reason for the flooding. And that needs to be considered, and I would invite you and respectfully request you to revisit the findings that you had discussed at the beginning about either assessing fines for those trees that were taken down to the current homeowner or requiring replacement of hardwood trees. Thank you kindly.
Okay, thank you.
Paul Wood, 16 Hilda Street. I guess this is more of a clarification for me, David. Could you know that picture you had of a minute ago of the lot? I just want to understand what your jurisdictional.
This one?
So, do I understand this 100-foot buffer zone for the vernal pool? You have jurisdiction up to that point?
Yeah, it's actually the buffer zone of the bordering vegetated wetlands within which the vernal pool is located.
So there's no. Do I understand that you could just require chain link fence that part, not in whatever, then there'd be up to a fight over here.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I'll definitely confirm that with town council.
Well, the only reason I'm bringing it up is I just want to protect the area as much as possible because things have come up over this whole last year. I know one of the big issues was at one point they couldn't do lot 4 unless you asked the planning board, maybe give them a variance on the road so they could push the house away because they couldn't do without it. They didn't get the variance and the house showed up. So I think they played you a little bit. So I'd be very careful. That's all. That's what my only opinion is.
Thank you.
Hello, Christy Wood, 16 Hildreth Street. Just a question. What is the expanded open sand area? That's just something that we're not quite sure. If maybe you could.
Well, I assume that's proposed. That's going to be a proposed nesting area. Correct, Brian?
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Are we expecting this would be at our next meeting, or do you think it would take longer?
Well, I might as well continue to the next meeting.
Next meeting, 28th.
See if that doesn't work out. It can be continued
Okay.
again. I would like to keep it open in any case to have a little bit, better drafting of the special conditions.
Yep.
Once
Agreed.
we settle on it.
We'd like to review those. Okay, all right, so if you get a draft before then, it would be good to get it out, but.
I'll try.
Yeah, okay, great. Take a motion to continue.
I move to continue this hearing until our next meeting, which is January 28th, 2025.
Motion from Chris.
Second.
Second from Bill, all in favor?
Aye.
I do have one question. Can we somehow get this hearing earlier in the evening next time we come back? These folks, they,
Yeah, good.
if we can get them in a little bit earlier, it would be, I'm sure they would appreciate it.
And Brian too, right?
Don't worry about me. Hey, don't worry about Brian.
All right, good request, Chris, thanks. All right.
You're welcome. Good night.
Happy New Year, everyone. All right. That is the end of our regulatory session. We still have a few more topics, so let's keep going. Discussion, so David, so just to frame this, speaking of the Board of Health, the Board of Health has contracted to do a gap analysis on the, go ahead, you describe it, David, go ahead.
Sure. So I don't think we need to go into a lot of detail right now of exactly what the gap analysis is. I think members should have some idea. But in any case, the consultant that the health department has hired for the analysis wants to speak with town boards and commissions to get input about what the boards and commissions are looking for. And his initial question is, what is the process? Is it that to have a meeting of the full board to talk about that, or to designate like a couple members to meet with him, and so that they can give him his input in that kind of a setting, and then come back and report to the full board.
Him being the consultant or
Consultant.
the Board of Health?
No, the consultant. The consultant.
Do the water districts should be involved in that?
I believe so.
They are in the scope.
Okay, so
It says they
yeah.
are.
Yeah, I think he'll be reaching out to them if he hasn't already to talk to them.
I know he's reached out to the planning board. The planning board discussed or made the same decision last week.
But I think this is a really good opportunity for board members to let him know what they want to see to address, I think, what everyone feels were deficiencies during the course of some of these more recent projects, dealing with contamination. I would personally recommend that a couple members meet with him, because I could easily see it going, an hour at least. And I don't know that we need to take up.
I think a couple hours.
It's going to go more than that, man.
It could be, and I don't.
It's complicated.
I don't see the need to take up,
I would, in any event, I would not make it part of one of our normal meetings. That if we were to decide we want all of us, it would have to me, it would have to be a special meeting.
Yeah.
But
Peter, do you want to do it? I'll do it with you.
Sure, I will, but I also want to say, we did this once before, and I know some people on the commission felt left out, I think. So whatever we do, let's make sure everyone at this DIOS is happy. And so maybe if it is a private meeting, I think we might have done this before, but we got to keep the rest of the commission in lockstep with what's going on. So they can commit, so they can contribute.
It's a one-time.
Right, it's a
just a
one-time meeting.
one-time?
It's a one-time meeting.
One time, I'm fine with that, like a one-time
Yeah.
thing,
Well,
I think we're trying to get rid of the ambiguity. Nobody knows what's going on with a lot of items.
Right. And let me just add, it may be a one-time,
Right.
but we have to have a feedback mechanism either before that meeting. I want to be sure everyone's happy, that's all. That they're getting what they want during the process, and then as well as the
So
result.
just to frame the question, this is all about protecting the aquifer protection. And so it's in the area of, we talked about septic tanks, it's in the area of PFAS contamination. It's all of these things that talk about that. And we saw in the 270 Billerica Road, we saw in a couple of other places. I forget what the other one was. We had
All of them.
Yeah, we see contamination, risk of contamination. My concern when I think about this is, we're chartered as a conservation commission to protect the water. And then when it's contaminated, it's like, I'm sorry, you got to go to the MCP in the state and you can't do anything. Like, what? Like, that to me so there's my feedback. But it's that kind of thing that we don't have the bite that we should have. So that's where so I'm good with not doing it with the whole board, personally, but.
If I could add, so I'm not, the guy they picked, I do not know, but he's a licensed site professional. Their whole thing is regulations. Not just the thing called the MCP, but when they have a project they're working on, they've got to look at all the regulations, including town ones. So when I read the scope that this fellow wrote, I felt very comfortable having, been in that part of the business, that he not only understood kind of what we were trying to do, but there were 4 or 5 places where I said, this guy either talked to somebody or really understands some of our issues. It wasn't just a perfunctory scope. It really looked like somebody had thought about the challenges a municipality like ours face, if not our exact one. So I felt pretty comfortable personally with the scope. The only point is we need to be sure you framed it very well, that we get input and get this thing resolved, so we don't have to spend all this time wrestling when we have contamination or whatever.
Right, so again,
So we need a piece of it.
So I think you really need to take advantage of this opportunity to tell this guy what you want to see in terms of, well, let's just say nominally, additional legal authority.
Right.
To make certain requirements of applicants.
So if I could make a proposal, if we decide to go with just a couple of us, let's be sure, I don't know if it's part of our hearing or offline or separately, but let's make sure we get your thoughts about what's driven, just like we did last spring, right? What's driving you nuts about the process? What information would you like to see, or whatever it is that you need?
Yeah, we got to be careful. That may be a violation of the open meeting law.
Well, not if we advertise, if we post it.
Well, but I think one of
It's not a hearing, though. It's not, there's no.
Well, but I think one of the main reasons for doing it was so that it doesn't have to be posted, and there aren't these other constraints. So I think it's more a matter of, do the other commission members have enough confidence, have enough trust in who's ever designated to be able to convey to the consultant, the concerns, the priorities.
So I feel comfortable with Peter, if Peter wants to be involved, or
Mark, you're
anyone else.
perfect
But
with
I don't think
the
we
water
all
district.
need to
Yeah, I
sit here.
definitely want to be involved in it, whether I do it
Okay.
myself or with you or somebody else, that's fine.
All right.
Mark, with the water department, he understands from that point of view.
Be excellent, yeah.
So
All right.
I mean, I think the
He
two
doesn't-
people would go,
Peter's done this
do
all
the
his
meeting, and then
life.
come back and report to the full body, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He knows the questions. He's
Yeah.
Okay.
he's a pro at it.
I'm good with that.
I'm good
I'm
with
seeing
it.
nodding.
No.
I'm, okay.
Yeah, so they would
You
go
got nothing on your
meet,
plate,
have the
man.
meeting, and then come back, report to all of us, and
So why don't we say, yeah, we'll have Peter and Mark organize with the consultant to have a sit-down meeting and go through this. If any of us have specific concerns, send them to Peter
You know what,
and
Peter,
Mark,
the way I look at it is, this all came up with
270 and
270 Billrica Road
And
and
Brick Kiln.
Kiln.
Road, and also
and
down
the car,
here. at
the car
Thorny-
wash, too.
Yeah, so there's quite a few. So we were,
Yeah.
we didn't know where we stood, or who had the answers to what's the Board of Health's part of this?
Right.
What's the planning board's part of this? Are we overlapping them? Are we fighting with, butting heads with each other?
Right.
'Cause
Another big one is
it was all-
243 Riverneck Road.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And I think, I don't know if we can talk about it per se, Carl, and I don't want to go on a big tangent, it's getting late, but I have thought about this, and one of the big questions that will come up eventually, I think, is do we need to do anything with our regs or our bylaws? Certainly internal communication within the town.
But if that's the kind of thing you think should be done, you got to tell this guy. That's
Right.
what I'm
Yeah.
emphasizing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
but that comes back to this commission.
So when would this take place? In the next
Oh, in the
couple of
next
weeks?
Well, so the way the process would be work is that I would contact the guy, saying, these two members from the commission have been designated to have this meeting with you, and presumably I will be there as well, and then we can just go ahead and schedule it. I mean, you're both generally available during
Do
the
you
day,
think-
right?
The only
Do you
time not
think you could
available
have
is-
some questions at our next meeting, just to say, this is the bullet points that we're gonna
Yeah.
talk about, we have an appointment with this guy? in
We
a week or
should,
two?
shouldn't we?
I think he wants to have it before the next meeting.
Before our next
I
meeting?
think he wants
Oh, he
to-
is under contract?
Yeah.
Chris, you probably know, is he under
So-
contract?
Yes, he is.
Okay, well, let's
So-
do it.
And my definite sense from him is that he wants to proceed as quickly as possible on
Well,
this.
Yeah,
how
so
about
I'm-
email it bullet
Yes,
points?
send email. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if we
There's a
need
water
to,
district meeting tomorrow, so I'll bring that up and make sure.
Yeah, and ask
that
them what they think.
No,
Yeah.
yeah.
but,
You can do two meetings,
if
one with
if
them.
we have any concern about open meeting, we can read the questions out in the meeting.
I mean, just no deliberations via email.
Yeah,
No
just no
deliberations.
deliberations, but.
No deliberations as a full, as more than a quorum.
Yeah, you just don't want to be discussing it back and forth in email.
Right, I mean, you can certainly send emails with questions.
Exactly.
You can certainly do
Throw
that.
that in, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
but for example, Mark and I can have dialogue by email,
Yeah,
Yeah,
or
sure.
coffee, or
yeah, yeah,
if we
because you're not a
choose.
quorum, yeah.
So, Mark, when did you say that you're not available in general?
I'm not available from the 4th to the 9th or 10th, something like that, of next month. I'll be in Florida then.
Okay, well, I think the meeting's going to happen before then.
Okay.
Before the 4th?
Yeah, so, but if it's before our next meeting, it's before
Right.
January 28th, so.
Right.
I'm sure he'll propose a couple of times and.
Okay.
Just watch your email or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, I think, and again, I think
No kidding.
my goal is to, I hope it saves the whole commission time down the road.
Good.
That would be, right, Mark? My goal is to like make this more clear, so we don't have to spend so
I don't
much
want-
time on it.
I don't want everybody looking, can we do that, or is that gonna be okay, or are they putting sewage in, or are they going with a septic system?
Right.
I
feel like
we do, we wanna be able to address and say, no, that can't be done.
I feel like all our meetings last year were extended a couple extra meetings each because we didn't have the answers to some of these things. So we were circling back, we were.
Yeah, we had silos, separate silos that
Right.
were not really
So if we can get
communicating.
beyond that, because I don't think any meeting should go like these last ones did last year. Crazy, it's too
Agreed.
long.
Unless Chris is running them, then they're quicker.
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
But but Bill, I've reflected on that, and you gotta admit, the reason they went long is the town had not really been confronted with this,
No, I agree with you.
because it wasn't on the
It was-
radar.
this was all
So it was
new.
all new to
It was all
everybody.
new.
All right, let's keep moving.
All right.
Let's keep moving. We made a decision. We got Peter and Mark. Thank you both very much for stepping up here. Appreciate it. And David organized that. So let's keep moving on. Land management, update on the Coolest Farm.
Well, there's under continual
Oh,
business.
did I oh, sorry.
Oh, yes, continuing business.
So, so the last email I got from the surveyor was that they had completed the research and a field work. They completed the research on all the parcels. They were going to be doing the field work for one of them. I forget exactly which one it was. They were going to be doing that last week, followed by the other
Before
two
the snow.
parcels. After that, was that?
Before the snow.
Yes, hopefully. So I haven't gotten any status updates since then. So, assuming they did do the field work for the one particular parcel last week, that maybe they were planning to do the other two this week. So once that's done, then they'll be able to provide us with paper plans or plans. And then it's then up to the commission to decide things like, permanent monumentation, where does the commission want that permanent monumentation to be located? What kind of permanent monumentation? Those are all things that are topics of future
Who's
discussions.
doing the work? Who's doing the survey?
It's Hancock Associates.
Hancock is?
So speaking of that, there is an invoice from them for $1,197. I think that the annual appropriation reservation management account can accommodate this. Ultimately, there's not enough in the account for the full $15,000 estimated total cost. So at some point, I think we'll have to go to an alternative, account. I'll talk to Paul about that. But in any case, the commission needs to authorize payment of this.
And that's for the field work.
No, this is the initial research and setup of project. You're talking about this invoice? Yeah.
It's
So this, I don't.
step one.
Yeah, so I don't think this does include any field work.
Okay.
That'll come.
Yeah,
Soon enough.
we'll be getting another invoice for that.
Okay.
Like 15,000 total there.
Yes, that's the total project cost.
So
For
do you-
how many lots?
3.
3.
Do you need a motion then for,
Yes.
okay, so I'll take a motion.
Carl,
to-
yeah, I move, Carl, that the commission approve the invoice that we have received from Hancock Engineering in the amount of $1,197.
Second.
Motion from Chris, second from Peter, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes, thank you. Okay, David, you want to give us an update on Coolest as well?
That's proceeding. I'd say the main thing to report is that we did get the baseline documentation report back from the consultant working on that. That's been forwarded to Sudbury Valley trustees, who's, I think, more or less, at this point, is proposed to accept the CR. Some of the additional things we're working on are like the site assessment, the environmental site assessment. Some kind of a boundary survey for that.
No milestones,
it's
but
moving.
things are moving
Yeah,
along.
yeah, they're
Okay,
moving.
all right. And on Warren Poll, I heard there was a milestone?
There was. Pleased to report that the CR has finally been submitted to the state.
Nice. Yay.
How long it will take them is anybody's guess at this point.
That is it's a long haul.
That's bad.
We're not done.
Well, no, I mean, they could definitely have changes
Yep.
that they want to see.
Yep.
So I don't think it'll be all the way back to the
It's a-
drawing board.
It's
but-
still a big milestone, though.
I'm getting confused. Who's the trustee now? Or will be?
For Warren Poll?
Yeah.
That's the Land Trust, Conservation Land Trust.
Yeah, they're the grantee.
And the grantee, rather, I'm sorry, and the periodic inspections?
They would
Are
do that. That would
they
be the
will
Land
do.
Trust.
Do they do those, though, before it's approved? Like, if it takes the
Well-
state 3 years to approve it, does that mean nobody's gonna be looking at how we're doing on the boundaries and meeting the CR?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but the BDR was done by ANCAPRA a year ago on that. It's about a year
Yeah, and there's going to be another BDR as well for the meadow.
for the meadow, yeah.
Okay, well, just something to think about, but if it hangs at the state for a long time, but.
You can certainly go out yourself and check the boundaries and violations if you
Yeah,
want.
you're welcome to.
I'd rather somebody else did it.
Gives
Okay.
you an opportunity to get out.
Let's keep moving, so that's good. I don't know of anything else at Warren Poll, there's nothing else. I'm trying to think, there was something else I wanted to mention, but I'm forgetting. Another land management, something somewhere, but I'm not sure what. So Littleton storage container?
So that has been removed. Happy to
Littleton
report
Road.
that. But the owner did say, and he sent me an email saying, well, but here's like half a dozen other properties where there are storage containers near the wetlands. And so, I mean, he strongly implied he wanted to see the commission take action on those. So I don't know how you want to handle that.
You send that list to all of us?
Yeah, yeah,
We
I will
Drive
do
by
that.
one of these and get eyes,
Did
at
you
least.
see any other containers?
On other properties?
Yeah.
No,
I didn't either.
I
I
haven't really.
saw one.
You did?
I haven't really been looking for any.
Send the list to us, and, we like to drive around, and we'll keep our
Okay.
eyes open, and
Well-
I want to take it seriously. If there's
Yeah.
if there's really something that we should
Yeah.
be looking at, I'm all in. I'm
And
all
a
in.
certain size is exempt or not?
Well, exempt from a
Building
requirement
permit.
for a permit from the building
Okay.
department, not exempt from commission regulations.
And one thing that you guys all know, but might be worth mentioning, that a lot of those backyards you can see from the bike trail. Because when you drive by, you can't see all the
Yeah, I'm not
backyards.
sure he's talking necessarily about Littleton Road only. It could be anywhere in town that he's, I don't know. I haven't seen the
He's
list.
included the addresses.
okay.
I think some of them are on Littleton Road, but not all of them.
Okay.
So I would just move forward on the assumption that at some point I'm going to hear from him again.
Yep.
Has the
Yeah.
commission done anything about these?
Are we comfortable in responding by saying, yeah, good point, but we have no evidence? Or when we have evidence somebody's
Well, the
filled in
reason why-
wetlands?
The reason
we
why
act?
his particular thing came up was
Right.
because they
That's what,
was
yeah.
working in the wetlands.
Yeah, so shouldn't we simply push back a little bit? I mean, he's right.
It wasn't
but,
that we went looking for it.
That's
Yeah,
right, so I would phrase
yeah,
it, when we have evidence of wetland violations, we take a look at it.
And what he's saying is, I'm giving you the evidence.
Right, yes.
Here's the
Well,
list.
Well, then tell them to give us the names of the locations.
That's the list.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
that's the
forward you
list.
Oh, I
He
didn't see
didn't
it.
give
I'm
names,
sorry.
he gave addresses.
Oh,
And,
So
it's
my
not.
point is, send us the
Yes,
list.
I will do that.
We
I'm
can
sorry.
all
I will do that.
check them out. Cover,
There's
amongst us.
something wrong with a man's character.
Yeah,
He
I-
gets caught
I-
at something and blows the whistle on other people.
I'm not gonna argue that, but if somebody's bringing us, however it gets to us, and it's a legitimate complaint, we should look at it.
Yep.
But I
Doesn't
mean,
matter.
you just, I mean, it might be something, yeah, that's right near the wetlands, but it might have been there for 50 years. So, you know, there are other things you got to take into account.
And it might not be any impact, like plowing in the wetlands, so.
But I don't have a problem with, let's take a look at it. I don't want to burden David with it, but I think.
I'd take at least a few
yeah,
out,
Yeah,
you
if
know?
it's in your neighborhood or you're in that area and you got the list, you know, take a look. But a reminder, do not go on someone's private property, just a statement, you know. Okay, and pictures would help too, if you see something that's questionable, so. We have, anything else on agents report, David? That was all you had listed. Okay, and finally, approval for signature. We have, our wonderful Vivian has been cranking away. I think there's only one left that's open, right? Yep, okay, so
December 10th.
we're almost with a clean new year, so awesome. We're right there, thank you very much. So, we've had these, October 8th is the first one.
I got a question on October 8th.
Yep,
Page 4. It said that I asked whether the state was planning on fixing the culvert on, it says Dunshire Drive. It's supposed to say 3A.
Kingsborough Road.
Tingsboro Road, 3A.
yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, the state wouldn't do it on Dunshire.
No, that's,
Yeah, good point.
them have been fixed by the town.
So you got that, right, Vivian?
Yeah,
Yep,
that's,
yep.
that's all.
Take a motion to approve the minutes for October 8th. Oh, this was the Nibby meeting.
He was almost attacked.
We,
at that
I
meeting.
think we had more people watching that meeting than any other meeting in our history.
That was,
Can we have him back, have Jane come back?
Yeah.
that was quite the meeting.
We may do some more stuff like that. We may do
I
something.
just think, yeah, we should.
We should.
Yeah, not an hour, but, you know,
Dave one time
15
brought
minutes.
a lady that had a hawk.
Really?
Right.
Yeah, Hawk Day. I was there for the
Yeah,
Hawk Day. That was
yeah,
really impressive.
All right, all right.
Can I bring a chickadee?
Bird seed in your pocket?
John might bring a willow tree in sometime.
I'll bring a squirrel.
Seeds. Willow tree seedlings.
Wait, bring a willow tree
All right,
and
let's-
have Nibby
Let's,
chew it
Don't
up.
have to worry about
guys,
me
let's
bringing the-
focus. Let's get these meeting minutes closed off here. Anyone want to make a motion on October 8th?
Move.
Motion from Bill,
Second.
second from Mark. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, with the change noted. Next one, October
2-2.
22. Peter was absent. Presentation on botanical survey at Cranberry Bog. Mark recused on a couple of things. You recused on.
AECom was there.
Okay, I'll take a motion.
Move to approve the minutes of October 22nd, 2024.
Motion from Chris, second from Bill, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. November 12, this is the, let's do the executive session first. So let's be careful on this one. This was, although at this point, we talked about it in public, so, but we did have a roll call vote, so we did that right. We had the summary of the situation from the attorney. I think all of that was accurate that Vivian captured there. We had a summary of actions at the end. We had a motion by Bill to file for a search warrant. We had a motion to adjourn. I confirmed that Attorney Weisfeld was the only person in the room with him. That's actually a Zoom, this executive session Zoom requirement, which I learned. So we did all that.
I move that we approve the executive session minutes of November 12th, 2024.
Motion from David, from Chris. Sorry?
Do you want to release them or not?
Yeah, I think we can release them. There's,
You can do, the motion can be approve and release.
I move that we approve and release the executive session minutes of November 12th, 2024.
motion from Chris, second from Mark. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
November 12th, regular session. Nobody was absent, we were all here. Talked about Willis Drive, we talked about Crooked Spring with trees. Well, I'll tell you, I was at Crooked Spring yesterday, and the sledding hill there is getting a lot of use. This is right on the,
Oh, yeah.
right near where all the trees are down, all the deadwood, but boy, you could tell there were kids there. I talked to one of the neighbors, he said, oh, there were kids all over the place on Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
That's great, that's great. A lot of discussion.
I move to approve the minutes of, the regular meeting minutes of November 12th, 2024.
Motion from Chris, second from John, all in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye, okay. Motion passes, and finally, we have November 26th. Peter was absent. I have to say, Vivian, you do a great job.
Does a great job.
And
Except when
decorate,
That's my need for drugs, but whatever.
and decorated the common. Huh?
I move to Mr. Chairman that we approve the meeting minutes of November 26th, 2024.
Motion from Chris, second from John again. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that is the approval is passed, and that is the end of our meeting.
Can I add a land management thing if I take 30 seconds?
Okay, 30 seconds.
I just want to share with the commission members, in case you want to weigh in, I've been working with Christine Clancy on a scope of work for the tree and invasive study that was authorized by town meeting.
Nice.
And I'd be happy to inform everybody privately or through this forum. But Carl had a great idea to use Crooked Spring. Christine wants to do roads.
I want to be
mostly,
clear, that was one suggestion.
and has a great idea for Crooked Spring. So I'm going to advance that. It's Christine's project. Christine Clancy, she's our tree warden. And she sponsored the thing with town meeting with Paul Cohn. But she is interested in something related to conservation in addition to the roadways that she wants to look at trees. So if you have any thoughts, let me know, but I'm going to push for that.
I'll just say that the reason I threw Crooked Spring out there as a site is that it has a number of different distinct invasives. It's got Japanese knotweed, it's got Phragmites in the wetlands, both of those near the wetlands, in the wetlands, and it's got plenty, as all of our sites have plenty of bittersweet. And it's very much on the road and visible to the street, all of those areas. Most of the inland part of that site, although the Phragmites are inland, are visible from the road, and that to me is kind of a good thing to make that site more visible, you know, if there's some activity done through this project. So anyway, that was my thought.
So hopefully that's, to put a finer point on it, the town master plans calls for doing invasive studies, and the town is responding by this money that was authorized.
When do you think you have the SOW ready? Scope of work ready?
Well, here's the thing, it's drafted,
Okay,
but Christine hasn't put her stamp on it.
okay.
And I sense it's going to go out to bid fast. So why don't I, if you'd like to see it.
I'd like to see it, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love input. I worked with, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, Bob Cote, who's a EPA PhD person, retired recently, has started to work on some of this stuff as sort of just resident at large, and he's been helping me with the scope. So we put our thoughts together. But yeah, and I'll add the
see a
Crooked,
copy,
I'll
yeah.
add it.
Yeah.
Love input, thank you.
Take a motion to adjourn. Motion from Bill, second from Bill. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Chelmsford Telemedia.